a foe. And in other news as well, a Labour MP has come out and said that the British taxpayer should pay reparations to some Caribbean countries for the slave trade. Where do you stand on that? Ladies and gentlemen, I will be with you all the way through until 6. Make sure you lock yourselves in. Get those emails coming in, ladies and gentlemen. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Yeah, I'll be taking your emails on the Gary Lineker saga. Like I said, we're going to hear from him shortly. But also as well, whether or not you think we should pay reparations to Caribbean countries for the slave trade. gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines.
Good afternoon, it's 3:01. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker has described the fallout over his criticism of the government's immigration policy as ridiculously out of proportion. The BBC presenter tweeted earlier this week comparing the language the government used to set out asylum plans to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Lineker says he stands by his comments and confirmed he will be presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. The Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, says it's important the BBC maintain impartiality if it's to retain the trust of licence fee payers.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
Well, Mr. Lineker spoke to reporters outside his home this morning and said he doesn't fear suspension by the BBC.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
Do you fear getting suspended?
No, I'm only mate. What are you doing?
Yes. Anything about the tweet, Gary?
Sorry, what
Do you
about
regret
it?
sending the tweet at all?
No.
Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January, but the number waiting longer than 18 months in the same period has come down. A survey released today by the Royal College of Nursing shows a significant decline in the quality of patient care, as well as the well-being of nurses and midwives across England. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK, meaning there's a potential risk to life. Blizzard conditions continue to spread across the UK, with the Met Office warning power cuts are likely, as well as travel delays and cancellations. The coldest temperature in March in more than a decade was recorded in the Highlands overnight, dropping to as low as -16 degrees. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, has been reconnected to Ukraine's energy grid after power was lost during Russian missile strikes. The plant was down to emergency diesel generators for the 6th time to keep cooling reactor fuel and prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. Ukraine's military says Russia fired 81 missiles, including 6 hypersonic missiles, on cities across the country. At least 9 people were killed in the strikes. Back here, Boris Johnson reportedly warned Dominic Raab privately about his conduct during his leadership. It's understood the ex-Tory leader has given evidence to the inquiry into allegations of bullying against the cabinet minister and independent lawyers looking into complaints made by senior civil servants. The Daily Telegraph reports it's highly unusual for a former Prime Minister to be involved in a Downing Street investigation. And some welcome good news. Supermarkets have started dropping limits on customers buying certain fresh produce following widespread supply shortages. Asda has removed the 3 products per person cap on some fruit and vegetables, saying overall availability has improved and should be back to normal within a couple of weeks. Tesco, Aldi, Lidl and Morrison's also limited purchases of items such as peppers, tomatoes and cucumbers. Retailers put shortages down to bad weather and transport problems in North Africa and Europe. And 25-year-old singer Mae Muller will represent the UK at this year's Eurovision Song Contest.
Instead I wrote a song about how you did me wrong. I could have cried at home and spent the night alone.
She'll perform at the event in Liverpool with the track I Wrote a Song. The contest is being held in the Liverpool Arena on the 13th of May on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. Miss Muller has described it as a dream. And it's pretty catchy. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's over to you, Patrick.
Yes, very catchy indeed. Now, lots to get through this hour as we start with the latest on Gary Lineker after he compared the government's migration policy to Nazi Germany. Now, he's told reporters that he stands by his comments and said that he's not afraid of being suspended by the BBC. Lineker has been criticised by a series of government ministers since his incendiary tweet on Tuesday when he said the language used by Home Secretary Suella Braverman was like that used by Germany in the 30s, and we, of course, all know what that means. Speaking to reporters outside his home this morning, though, Lineker was asked, do you stand by what you said in your tweet? And we can hear from Gary now.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
Do you fear getting suspended?
No, I'm only, mate. What are you doing?
Anything about the tweet, Gary?
Sorry, what
Do you
about
regret
it?
sending the tweet at all?
No.
Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
Yes, well, there we go. Joining us now, live in the GB News studio, is our political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, when you became a political reporter, did you ever think you'd talk about Gary Lineker?
Talk about Gary Lineker all day.
Yes.
No. Yes, this is quite an interesting story, really, because there are so many different political elements to it. We've now seen both the Culture Secretary and the Home Secretary weigh in and essentially say that Gary Lineker's comments are very disappointing. But actually, this is quite a useful political row for the government. The government is very proud of its new small boats policy. It believes that the public is on side about stopping the small boats, and it's probably right about that. All the polls show that small boats is number 2 issue for Tory voters who voted Tory at the last general election. So having Gary Lineker essentially draw attention to this new piece of legislation is quite useful for the government.
Yeah, now, Gary Lineker has something like 8.6 million Twitter followers, most of whom, it's fair to say, like him, and that, of course, is fair enough. So it might be easy for him to think that he has got mass public support on his side, but you seem to be alluding to the idea there that the majority of the British public do not support what he said.
Well, the majority of the British public are very concerned about the small boats issue. So it might be that, obviously, there are a lot of nuances going on there, and some of them might not like exactly what the government is doing about it. But the government has certainly decided, and you can tell from all of the messaging they're giving out, you know, on that podium yesterday was stop the small boats. The government has decided that this policy is a way to draw clear blue water between Conservatives and Labour. Labour, lots of the policies that Keir Starmer laid out in that speech in Manchester a couple of weeks ago were very similar to the sort of things that Rishi Sunak has been saying. But the one area of differentiation was on stopping illegal immigration. So the Conservatives think if we can crack this issue, then we stand a chance of winning the general election. And just the policy they've come up with, there are a lot of things which still need to be ironed out about it. But instead of having to address questions about some of the more tricky bits of the policy, for example, what happens to immigrants who come here illegally, are detained for 28 days, and then can't be sent to Rwanda because of issues with the courts, will they become stateless? Technical issues like that which need to be sorted, the government isn't really having to address those issues because there's this distraction of the Gary Lineker problem.
Well, there's some mixed messaging going on at the moment about what the BBC are going to do about this. There are rumblings in reports that he could face sanctions for it. There are also, though, tweets coming out of Gary Lineker himself saying, well, it's been an interesting couple of days. Happy that this ridiculously out-of-proportion story seems to be abating, and very much looking forward to presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. Thanks all again for your incredible support. It's been overwhelming. How difficult a situation is this now for the BBC? Because he clearly feels as though he's not going to face any sanctions whatsoever.
Well, it's an incredibly difficult situation for the BBC, and I'm hearing contradictory reports, some saying that the BBC now considers the matter resolved, others saying that he may still face into disciplinary action. And essentially, the problem for the BBC is that technically Gary Lineker hasn't broken the terms of his contract because he isn't employed by the BBC. He isn't subject to the same guidelines.
That is interesting,
journalists.
though, because HMRC are trying to essentially go after him for saying, well, you are an employee of the BBC, and this is why we want this amount of tax. So it could actually be quite a useful thing for Gary Lineker, this, if the BBC do come out and say, no, you are very much freelance, kind of maybe gets him off the hook there a bit, really.
Well, it could well. It wouldn't be a particularly good optics for Gary Lineker if this ends up being a big tax dodging scheme. But yeah, it is a tricky issue for the BBC because obviously, despite the fact that he is a freelancer, he's working on contract, so technically not an employee, he is clearly in some ways the face of the BBC. He's very much associated with the BBC. So can the BBC seriously sustain a position when one of their highest paid stars can say very, very inflammatory comments about government policy over and over again?
Yes.
And not be considered to be breaching the BBC's impartiality?
Well, this is it. Thank you very much for this, Olivia. Olivia, they're our political reporter, because there's one thing it being inflammatory comments, there's another thing about its factual accuracy and whether or not it does diminish the horrific impact of the Holocaust and Nazi Germany, etc. And I think something that really possibly should be getting more attention is how many members of the Jewish community, leading figures, have condemned what Gary Lineker has said, including Government Minister Grant Shapps, actually. So, to get more reaction to this, I am joined now by Lord Eric Pickles, who is the United Kingdom's Special Envoy for Post-Holocaust Issues. Eric, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Do you not think it's maybe going slightly underreported how offended vast swathes of the Jewish community are about what Gary Lineker has said?
It is. I mean, I personally don't care whether he attacks the government or not, and I don't care if he shoots his mouth off or not. But what he's essentially done, and I'm sure it's unintentional, is he's trivialised the Holocaust by making a comparison to what's occurring in the Channel to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, plus people who were homosexuals, Roma and Sinti, trade unionists, and political and religious dissenters. It's ridiculous. We had in January, we had a survivor came to talk to Parliament, and she talked about hiding in the wardrobe with her mother in the space behind when the Nazis came. Saw her father shot before her. Her mother died of a disease in the ghetto. Her and her younger brother managed to escape. They were caught by the Nazis, and the Nazis didn't shoot the young boy or sent him to a gas chamber. They just simply threw him alive into an open grave and buried him. You cannot tell me you can even compare that to the Holocaust. We've seen fools wandering around wearing yellow patches who are anti-vaxxers. We have people, for the most trivial things, comparing themselves to the Jews and the suffering. And that's what Mr. Lineker has done, is diminish the Holocaust, is in a way, it's a kind of a Holocaust distortion. And he should think really carefully about it. I'm sure he'd be welcome on a trip to visit Auschwitz with some school children. I'm sure he'd be very welcome to meet with the Holocaust Education Trust or the Memorial Day Trust. And I'm sure they'd take him through all these various things. But it is basically not a good thing for a public figure to be doing.
No, look, exactly, and I think you put that incredibly eloquently. And I'm kind of with you on this, which is it's not really so much what you said. All right, there's BBC impartiality guidelines. It's up to the BBC, really, to decide whether or not he's broken that. You could argue it's up to the punters as well to decide whether or not, knowing his political views, they want to carry on watching things like Match of the Day. But the main thing, for me anyway, is whether or not he's trivialised something as absolutely heinous as the Holocaust. And I think that's maybe something that there should be more of a light shined on it, and there isn't really any comparison, is there, to the way that the Tory government is going about dealing with illegal immigration in the Channel and, well, frankly, the way that Hitler went about trying to exterminate a load of people, you know?
Yeah, and I have to say Hitler succeeded to a large extent. He murdered 9 out of 10 Jews in Poland. I was recently in North Macedonia. 27,000 Jews were murdered there. There's only 350 Jews left in North Macedonia. You know, you cannot compare it. Now, I'm sure, as I said, there's an open invitation for Mr. Lineker. Let him come and learn the facts. But please don't compare anything that this government is doing to the Holocaust. It's not for the sake of the government. The government's big enough to be able to defend itself. It's because at a time when the last survivors are no longer going to be with us, when it starts to move from contemporary history into the history books, it's going to be massively important that we understand it wasn't so long ago that people were murdered because of their race or their religion. I mean, the BBC's made complete
Well, this is what I'm going to ask you.
I'm
It's
just
seamlessly moving on, really, to the BBC in this sense, which is that, you know, if they do stand by him, which Gary Lineker is obviously very confident, if his latest tweets are anything to go by, that they are going to stand by him, are they almost complicit in trivialising the Holocaust?
Well, I think there's one great certainty in British politics, and I've been involved a long time. If you give the BBC an opportunity to make a stance on a moral issue, they'll almost always certainly get it wrong. And I mean, I don't think the way in which they vacillated over this has helped at all. I don't blame Mr. Lineker. I certainly blame the BBC's lack of grip on an issue. And I think, you know, the BBC does extraordinarily well in bringing facts about the Holocaust to the British public, but there does need to be a degree of consistency. Now, if I was the Director General, if I was his line manager, I'd put my arm around his shoulder and say, look, Gary, you've got this wrong. And why don't we do something about it? Why don't you engage in anti-Semitism, see what's happening, look at the Holocaust, just get some basic facts, because somebody of his very high profile could do the world of good in the way that he's done a world of bad by comparing the government to the Nazis. It never works out. As Karen Livingston, it didn't work out terribly well to him.
Well, no, that's true. Look, thank you very much. Great to have you on the show. Much appreciated. That is Lord Eric Pickles there, who's the UK Special Envoy for post-Holocaust issues. Well, look, earlier today, the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, she accused of borrowing from his playbook by being the party of goal hangers, apparently, in a row over the government's asylum policy. Lineker has responded to Mordaunt by tweeting, "Thank you for mentioning me in your clumsy analogy. I'm just happy to have been better in the 6-yard box than you are from the dispatch box. Best wishes." Fantastic stuff. These footballing analogies just keep on coming, don't they? The BBC, though, of course, not showing him the red card after his own goal. I'll stop. Anyway, guess what the latest craze is sweeping TikTok, though? No, it is not a new dance, thankfully, although it is criminal gangs doing marketing for their speedboat trafficking business. Some trips are being advertised for £7,000 across the channel for what they say is a 45-minute journey to get into the UK. Now, Rishi Sunak has pledged to stop the small boats and will meet with Macron tomorrow. But will any of this help our authorities to tackle this threat and the gangs behind it? Joining me now is former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force, it's Kevin Saunders. Kevin, thank you very much. A lot of people find it hard to believe that people can post videos on TikTok advertising trips for £7,000 and 45 minutes over to the UK, and yet we aren't able to stop them as a country.
Good afternoon, Patrick. Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? I had a look at the advert just before I came on here. Absolutely fantastic. This is going to be a difficult one, because these people, if they're advertising it for 45 minutes, they're going to be coming from a lot further down the channel. It won't be sort of Dover Calais. It'll be much further down the channel. And Border Force haven't got any vessels that are fast enough to intercept the boats. We would have to rely on the Royal Navy to do that, and using their Scimitar fast patrol boats. That is the only way we would be able to intercept them.
Yeah, and just to clarify on that then, Kevin, the point of difference here with maybe some of the original boat journeys that we've been seeing is that the adverts here are for essentially high-powered speedboats, aren't they?
Yeah, yes, they are. And this is really difficult, because this isn't going to start from the beaches. These high-powered speedboats have got to come off some sort of dock. So that, I would have thought, would have limited where they can come from. But the French, we would have to be speaking to the French and get their Cap Green A tracking station. That would really have to be on board, because they would have to be able to identify that vessel very quickly for us to get anywhere near intercepting it.
Yeah, it does also raise serious questions. If somebody has £7,000 in their savings that they can just use as a high-speed taxi service over to the UK, presumably on top of the amount of money they've already paid to get to wherever part of France that is, does it slightly undermine the notion that a lot of these people coming over here are indeed poor and helpless?
Yeah, well, you've hit the nail on the head, Patrick. That's quite ridiculous, isn't it? These are clearly economic migrants. that their families have paid for them to come over. And it's a big con, because they'll come over, they'll claim asylum, they won't get asylum, they'll get humanitarian protection, and then they'll try and bring the rest of the family over as dependents. You know, it's a big game, and we're losing it at the moment.
Kevin, thank you very much. Kevin Saunders there, who is former Chief Immigration Officer at UK Border Force, bringing you up to date with the latest tactics being used to cross the Channel. High-powered speedboats, £7 a pop, 45 minutes, bish, bash, bosh, you are into Britain. So, while the government is talking tough, though, on illegal immigration, they do seem to be softening their stance slightly on legal immigration, and they're hoping that overseas workers could be used to plug the labour shortage in the UK, and the British construction industry could be the first to benefit from more lax recruitment processes. Well, here in the studio to pick through this is our economics and business editor. It's Liam Halligan with On the Money. Talk us through it then, Liam.
Well, the flip side to the endless debate this week so far, the debate, apart from Gary Lineker, is, of course, about those small boats. We had the government putting forward some really controversial legislation before Parliament on Tuesday that keeps us in the European Convention on Human Rights, but does mean, if it goes through the Commons, if it holds the road, that the government can deport people when they arrive illegally, even if they're appealing to the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg, whereas previously they'd have to keep them here during that process. But there's also a flip side to this, Patrick. When Liz Truss was Prime Minister, she famously had a 90-minute stand-up row with Suella Braverman because, as Prime Minister, she wanted to liberalise immigration rules to get more people in, more labour, more work, more GDP, more growth, more tax revenue and so on. It's always this trade-off between the sense of unfair immigration on the one hand and economic growth on the other hand. And even this week, of all weeks, we're getting signs from the government that some aspects of the immigration system will be liberalised because of the shortage of labour. I've got some numbers here which we can look at, and radio listeners can keep their ears peeled as opposed to their eyes. We've got 1.2 million job vacancies in the UK still. That's a big number when you think the whole workforce is about 28 to 30 million. So 1.2 million job vacancies across the UK. Already there are visas that employers can apply for, special visas for care workers, vets, civil engineers, sectors where there is a particular shortage. Graphic design is another one. But what's proposed now are additional special visas, Patrick, that employers can apply for construction, hospitality and even retail. Now, this is aside from the traditional agricultural schemes that we have every year to seasonal workers to pick crops. And what the government are telling me now, the voices in the dark, they're saying that this story is true, that it's under consideration, but no decision has yet been made. And this is really important to highlight to our viewers and listeners. This is the kind of flip side of the immigration debate. A lot of GB News viewers and listeners, I know you talk about it a lot, they'll be worried about unfair illegal immigration. They'll be worried, understandably, competition for social housing, for NHS care, for primary school places for their kids and all the rest of it. On the other hand, if they want someone to look after their elderly mum who's frail, if they want people to serve them in restaurants, if they want workers in other sectors to build homes so maybe their kids got more chance of buying or renting a house at a reasonable amount of cash, then there will need to be some give and take on this immigration debate. It's a really difficult thing to balance. And it's interesting to me that news of this has come out of Whitehall just at the time when there's so much debate kind of on the other side of the immigration debate. But look, this is a circle which the Tories are going to have to square because they want to be seen to be controlling illegal immigration. I agree with you. The next election will stand or fall on this issue above all other issues, not just in Tory seats, but the Red Wall as well. But also the election will stand or fall on economic growth, prosperity. And these are the two sides of the immigration debate.
Thank you very, very much. Liam Halligan there, as ever, managing to walk across that particular tightrope and balancing it all. Thank you very much. That's our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Right, OK, well, Britain is freezing, apparently. There is a weather warning in place in large parts of the country, and even the dogs arriving at Crufts this morning had to battle through the snow. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not
believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back, and I'm here all the way through until 6 o'clock. It is Patrick Christys on GB News. Here's a little taste of what I've got coming up. So Emmanuel Macron and Rishi Sunak will meet tomorrow in the first UK-France summit for 5 years. I'm going to be asking, though, are the French really our friends? Yes, so we'll get stuck right into that. And should Britain pay reparations for its role in the slave trade hundreds of years ago? A Labour MP thinks the British taxpayer should fork out and give a load of money to Caribbean countries. Where do you stand on all of that? I've got a lively debate on that one coming your way very shortly. But first, it is time for your latest news headlines with Rory.
Hello, it is 3:29. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. The Culture Secretary has told the Commons she welcomes the BBC talking to Gary Lineker about his behaviour on social media, and it is important the broadcaster maintains its impartiality. The Match of the Day presenter posted a tweet earlier this week comparing the language the government used to set out asylum plans to that used by Germany in the 30s. Gary Lineker says he stands by his criticism of the government's asylum policy. The number of people in England waiting to start hospital routine treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January. But the number waiting longer than 18 months in the same period has come down. The government and NHS England are aiming to eliminate waiting times of more than a year by March 2025. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK, meaning there is a potential risk to life. Blizzard conditions continue to spread across the UK, with the Met Office warning power cuts likely, as well as travel delays and cancellations. The coldest temperature in March in more than a decade was recorded in the Highlands overnight, dropping to a low of -16 degrees. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, has been reconnected to Ukraine's energy grid after power was lost during Russian missile strikes. The plant was down to emergency diesel generators for the 6th time to keep cooling reactor fuel and prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. Ukraine's military says Russia fired 81 missiles, including 6 hypersonic missiles, on cities across the country, killing at least 9 people. TV, online and DAB plus radio, this is GB News. Now, back to Patrick.
Right, I've got loads coming your way, ladies and gentlemen, including what is going to be a rather spicy debate, as I understand it, on whether or not we should pay reparations to Caribbean countries. A Labour MP thinks we should, as a result of the historic slave trade. I know a lot of you are getting in touch on that already. I'll get your views out there on the telly, gbviews@gbnews.uk. But before we go to that, as you've just heard, large parts of the UK are in the grip of a cold snap, with the Met Office warning up to 16 inches of snow in some areas. The coldest temperature of the year was recorded last night. It was -16 in an unpronounceable place in the Highlands. Significant disruption to transport, including flights, power lines and phone network coverage, is expected in the areas covered by the Met Office warnings. And as viewers can see in these images here, conditions have been pretty treacherous for motorists, and the RAC said that there have been, unfortunately, 50% more breakdowns than usual in the worst affected areas. Some drivers stuck in the snow in parts of South Yorkshire and Wales. But the snow wasn't bad news for everyone. Oh, here we go. Look at that little dog running around there. Anyway, if you're listening on radio, that's a dog in the snow. I am joined now, though, by Paul Hawkins, who's drawn the short straw and has got the job of standing out in the freezing cold in Grassington in Yorkshire, where it looks like it's been raining.
Yeah, technically we're in Skipton in Yorkshire, on the edge of the Yorkshire Dales, and to Patrick, it's out in Nahara, by the way, in Scotland, -16 in the Highlands overnight, 11 degrees in Cornwall. Here, there was some snow. It's gone now, but only, half an hour, 40 minutes drive west towards Leeds, towards Otley, which is where we woke up this morning. A lot more snow there. It's not treacherous. It's not the beast from the east. I'd say it's barely even, a medium-sized animal from the east, and it's certainly not Snowmageddon. But there is some snow around, and the forecast is that this amber alert has now kicked in, and they do say it's going to get worse, that it will turn to snow, that there will be blizzards, and there could be significant disruption. That's what the amber alert means. It's in place in a little finger running up the spine of the country from Stoke-on-Trent to Durham, making its way through the Pennines, through Yorkshire, through the Peak District, and then also for mid and North Wales and eastern. Snow warnings are in place, but it is patchy and it's no guarantee of snow. I guess the Met Office just have to err on the side of caution in case there is some snow, and there is significant disruption, not just to transport on the roads, but also to mobile phone coverage and power outages as well. So those are the warnings that are in place. It doesn't mean there's a guaranteed risk of snow, but they're saying look out, check the forecast, take the appropriate action if you have to, work from home if you have to, and make sure you check in on the vulnerable, such as the elderly.
Is it particularly chilly where you are, Paul? I can see you got the gloves and the hat on.
Yeah, it is definitely cold, and there are yellow warnings from the Met Office in place over a much wider area of the UK, which is basically it's really cold. There could be some ice around, but it's not as serious as an amber warning. So it is really cold at the moment, and in fact, it's kind of sleeting, to be honest, and the sleet actually makes you wetter than if there was snow, so it actually feels like it's colder. But at the moment, it's okay in this part of the world, and honestly, we've been talking to people here. We know that the Yorkshire folk are pretty hardy folk. They're not fussed about it at the moment, to be honest. Yeah, they're watching out for it, but many of them are saying we've seen worse, and I'm getting called a southern softie.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't possibly call you that, Paul, but there we go. Look, Paul, thank you very much. Paul Hawkins there, who has drawn the short straw and has been made to stand out in the sleet. Just going to read a quick email from Annette here, who says, it's normal weather, for heaven's sake. And I am inclined to agree with you, Annette, I must say, but there we go. Anyway, lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts on the debate that we're going to be having very shortly on reparations, which is whether or not we should be paying reparations to countries where there was, of course, the slave trade. A Labour MP, in case you're wondering why we're talking about it, has come out and floated the idea. Quite a few of you are saying no on this, and we are going to be having that big debate on it. People saying that mother came over from Ireland. This is John. Sorry, his mother came over from Ireland in the 1950s. Should I, as a British taxpayer, have to pay reparations for the Caribbean islands? That happened 200 or 300 years ago. I think that will be quite a common view, that, John, certainly. And Nick has said it won't be a problem, don't worry, we will be able to afford all these reparations after we've received reparations from the Romans and the Vikings. So, yes, I think I can sense the tone on that one. But, yes, here is a question for you, though. Should we actually have to give millions of pounds to countries affected by slavery in the 19th century? There will be a hot debate on that, and I'm sure it will be slightly hotter than the place where there was light drizzle, which we took you to earlier on. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like.
Absolutely.
On Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, The People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, Labour MP Clive Lewis has called for the government to engage in meaningful negotiations with the Caribbean over Britain paying reparations for the transatlantic slave trade. Well, Lewis likened the relationship between the UK and the Commonwealth to an abusive relationship in which one partner has endured 400 years of the most hideous abuse, one who now seeks charity, not charity, but restitution. So, should Britain pay reparations to its former colonies? Joining me now is Dr Zaria Masani, historian of the British Empire, and Martin Whittock, who is a historian and licensed lay minister for the Church of England. I've been asking for emails on this as well. We'll go to those shortly. Should we be paying reparations for the slave trade? Dr Zaria, I will bring you in now. Do you think that Clive Lewis is right and that the British taxpayer owes various Caribbean nations a boatload of cash?
No, I don't think so at all. I think it's a complete nonsense to be talking about reparations for something that happened 200 or 300 years ago. The descendants of the victims of that time, we cannot definitely ascertain simply by paying a government in the Caribbean. We have no idea where those reparations are going to end up. Also, who's going to pay those reparations? And are we going to deduct from those reparations the enormous costs to the British Navy of policing the abolition of slavery across the world, not only the Britain's trade, but which came to about 2% of national income at its average height. And the question then is also who pays these reparations. So if the British taxpayer is going to pay them, you will have, firstly, the descendants of slaves themselves, who are British taxpayers now, black British people, will be paying the same taxes for those reparations. And also the vast majority of British people who are descended from factory workers, farm workers, etc., whose conditions were very little better than slaves. In fact, in some cases, worse. So this whole idea of this restitution culture, I think, is a bit of a nonsense. We need to address modern slavery today and put our resources into that. And whatever resources are available should go into that. 9 million people in Africa today are in modern-day slavery.
Yes, OK. Martin, I'll bring you in on this, as we've just been hearing there. I mean, the British, of course, did also play a significant role in ending the slave trade. And, frankly, a lot of people alive today, like myself, you could trace my family tree back as far as you like, had absolutely nothing to do with the slave trade. So why should British taxpayers today be made to fork out?
Because I think the whole British community in the 19th century was enriched by the slave trade. Britain received 2 centuries of unpaid labour from over 15 million African slaves in the Caribbean. The wealth generated by this came to about 11% of the British economy in the early 19th century, and which was built on that, billions of pounds. But also, in order to compensate slave owners when slaves were freed, the UK government in 1833 paid them somewhere in the region of £17 billion in today's values. And so huge was the loan taken by the government to pay off the slave owners. And I think people who are listening and viewing this will be shocked to discover that it wasn't paid off until 2015. It was only in 2015 that the UK taxpayer stopped paying the modern creditors and investment houses who'd inherited the loans and consequently benefited from that payment made in the 1830s. Billions and billions of pounds, and not a penny went to the slaves or their descendants. And if it's not going to be the UK government, then somebody, in my opinion, needs to be paying. There's a Latin legal phrase that says, "Quae bono," who gains from it? Well, some families and some institutions made a mint out of slavery. My opinion is, follow the money, someone needs to pay.
All right, Dr. Zarir, come back to that, please.
Well, this idea that this is sort of guilt money that is going to be paid from people who were not responsible for what happened. We hear about the costs of compensating owners. What this gentleman forgets is that thousands of owners were not big slave owners. They were not big corporate houses. They were little old ladies living in Cheltenham whose pension was being paid for by owning half a slave or a slave. Now, they had to be compensated, and it was done at a time when private property was considered sacrosanct. The only way of abolishing slavery was by buying out the slave owners. And slave ownership wasn't just a Western European phenomenon, it was a global phenomenon, which the British helped stamp out across the British Empire. It was carried on in the Middle East, in the Arab world, in China, in India, where I come from, right into the late 19th, early 20th century.
OK. How far back do we go, Martin? Because if we're going to all fork out for reparations, shouldn't people who are descendants of the Ottoman Empire also fork out from it? What about, of course, people in Africa who were responsible for the slave trade as well? Why is it us?
Well, I have no doubt that the responsibility of this is wider than us. But the simple matter is, I'm British, and I want to take moral responsibility for my share of it.
What would you pay?
Sorry?
What would you pay?
What would I well, obviously, I would pay a significant amount. I mean, I would be prepared to pay a chunk of my taxes to people in the Caribbean and communities that are still struggling. Yes, I would.
How much?
I've never voted for. I've never voted to cut my taxes because I think there are so many things that are so important. I would be prepared to pay for this. Yeah, I would.
Well, why don't you just donate money?
And Would you give a discount to black British people?
Well, I think this is a debate we have to have, but I think simply saying no is inappropriate. And I think the British economy as a whole and British society as a whole has gained from it. Any of us living now today in Britain, black or white, whoever we are living in a society that has benefited hugely from the wealth generated by the slave trade. And I think we have a moral responsibility to engage with Caribbean states to try to do something about that. I'm not saying it's the only problem facing the Caribbean, but I think our heritage is there in the mix. And I would be prepared to start engaging with that moral question. Yes, I would. And it might cost me. Yes, it would.
OK, I'm just going to ask Martin, because this is something you clearly feel very passionate about. Why on earth you've not done it earlier?
Sorry? Well, I think like many people, I have been grossly ignorant. I think that many people, I've been locked into, you know, the pressures of today, the issues of the moment. And it literally is only in the last 4 or 5 years that I have looked at this myself seriously and realised that until 2015, we were paying off slave owners, but we wouldn't pay a penny to the descendants of slaves. So, yeah, I put my hands up. I should have done something about this a long time ago. But I think better late than never is
respond to that claim that we have all benefited massively as a society as a result of the slave trade, and therefore we now owe people something?
We have all benefited globally, not just as British people, but as Indian people like me, who have benefited all over the world from slavery all over the world. The transatlantic slave trade was a relatively small part of slavery all over the world. There were huge slave markets all over Africa, the Middle East. Some of the biggest beneficiaries of slave ownership are Nigerian millionaires. Now, I think unless there is some kind of global strategy of compensation, it makes no sense for Britain, which took the lead in abolition globally, which incurred huge costs, 2% of national income, half the naval budget, from the 1830s and 40s, I think Britain has the least need to be paying for this.
OK. I'm going to ask you about this now, Martin, in the sense of there's a decent point there, which is that the reason why the slave trade could predominantly exist was because there were people at source, as it were, who were prepared, of course, to go and round people up and put them into slavery, and those people became very rich off it. So, with respect, are you going to go around to certain countries like the one Nigeria was mentioned there and try and approach a Nigerian billionaire and try and get the money off him?
There's no doubt about it, and as the previous guest has just said, that the web of slavery spreads far and wide, and I absolutely accept that. I understand that.
And including, by the way, just to say, including, are we also going to go over to several Muslim countries who did enslave white Europeans as well? Because if we are, then it's just a game of back and forth, and you could argue there's absolutely no point anyone getting involved in it, Martin.
I understand the point you're making. All I'm saying is that I think the damage that was done to the Caribbean is still lived damage today. I think the problems of the Caribbean is very much a lived problem today. And I think we as a nation played a part in that. And I can't take responsibility for other people's countries. I can only take responsibility for mine. And I feel that I have a moral responsibility to do something about this. And others must make their own positions clear. But I think as a British person, I think I do have a moral position on here. I know it's complicated, but I think there are things going on today that are the products of things that my ancestors did not that long ago. I mean, we're talking about 200 years ago, and maybe I have a responsibility.
Did they, though? Because my ancestors didn't, and I don't fancy paying a penny, to be honest with you. So did your ancestors directly do anything involved in the slave trade, Martin?
No, they didn't.
Right.
But they smoked tobacco, they used sugar, they maybe worked in the port of Bristol. In other words, the whole of the British economy benefited hundreds of thousands of people. It wasn't just plantation owners. So the answer is, my family didn't directly, nope, but I as a British person benefited, yep, because we all did. We all do.
Dr. Zarir, I take it you're not inclined to part with any of your cash?
I'm not, because I don't see it doing any good. I don't think the problems of the Caribbean today, such as they are, have anything to do with slavery. I think they're to do with problems of governance, of economic opportunity, etc. in the Caribbean. And I don't think a handout from Britain is going to make any difference to that. And I don't think it addresses the problem of modern-day global slavery and the kind of web which your guest accepts, accepted across the world. I don't see how that is going to be addressed. And also the fact that a lot of people in Britain, white British people, were horribly exploited, were not beneficiaries of slavery, did not benefit from the profits of sugar or tobacco or any of those things, worked incredible hours in factories, up chimneys, etc. Are those people going to get compensation for capitalist exploitation? Where would this end?
Well, it's a fascinating debate, chaps, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it. Thank you very, very much, both of you. That is Dr. Zahir Masani, there is historian of the British Empire, and Martin Whittock, who is also a historian and a licensed lay minister for the Church of England. No doubt your emails will be flooding in thick and fast on that. In fact, I can see quite a few of them now. Patrick, I have not noticed any personal benefits from slavery, so I won't be paying. That's from Brian. James says, what nonsense. Waste more time and money and not have a vote on it. There we go. OK, all right, fair enough. So, yes, not a lot of positivity in the inbox for the idea of paying money as reparations to countries for the slave trade. But keep your views coming in. GBviews at gbnews.uk. We'll be returning to that a little bit later on in the show. Now, Home Secretary Suella Braverman is under fire for an email written in her name to Tory supporters in which she attacks the left-wing establishment of lawyer, activists and civil servants. The comments prompted an angry response from civil servants, although Downing Street said Braverman did not see, sign off or sanction the email that was sent Conservative campaign headquarters. So CCHQ have basically sent this email. So, was she defending her remit? Or was she out of order? Or in light of the comment there from Suella Braverman, did she have any idea about it whatsoever? With me now is political commentator Joe Phillips. Joe, thank you very much. Well, the slight blame game appears to be going on here, but regardless, an email was sent and it did appear to essentially slate a left-wing and biased woke civil servant establishment. What do you make of that? Do you think the civil service is biased?
No, the civil service is impartial, and part of the ministerial code is to uphold the impartiality of civil servants. I mean, at the moment, we've got bullying claims against the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister Dominic Raab. Priti Patel, Suella Braverman's predecessor as Home Secretary, was also the subject of bullying, which, when Boris Johnson as Prime Minister refused to accept the findings of that inquiry, saw his head of ethics from the civil service, Alex Allen, resign, and the senior cabinet permanent secretary at the Home Office, Philip Rutnan, resign. So the Home Office, as we know, is a massive fiefdom, if you like. It is probably far too big and should be divided up into different parts to deal with the many, many different things. Successive Home Secretaries have said it's not fit for purpose, and I think this is a sloppiness, Patrick. You know, why didn't she know? This is a letter that went to Conservative supporters. It would have been better coming from the chairman or the deputy chairman of the Conservative Party. It was ridiculous.
Just on it, Joe. A couple of points on this. So, if successive Home Secretaries and indeed politicians in general have come out and said that they think the civil service is incredibly biased against them, that might paint a certain picture. The other one for me on this is about the impartiality. Now, I, as I'm sure we all do, would hope that the civil service is full of people who are completely and utterly impartial. But at the same time, we are all human beings. And impartiality is a very difficult thing, especially in the age, as we all know again, of unconscious bias. And can we really say with any kind of certainty whatsoever that the civil service is actually impartial?
Yes, I believe we can. I mean, I think there is a difference between the frustration that politicians of all political hues find at the perhaps slowness of moving forward with plans that they want to implement, the bureaucracy. You know, some people who are watching and listening will be old enough to remember that excellent series, Yes, Minister, that Margaret Thatcher apparently thought was a documentary. So, you know, there is obviously going to be a friction between the politicians who want things done yesterday and civil servants whose job it is to examine stuff, to do risk assessments, feasibility studies, and sometimes say this won't work, or sometimes say this is crazy, or it's too expensive, or, you know, we could do it another way. So I think there are genuine frustrations, but I don't think it is right for the Home Secretary, who has got a massive department, to have had her name put to an email, a letter to Conservative supporters. And I think it just shows that general disregard for the way of proper behaviour in government and the separation, actually, between government and the political party.
When you do look at the fact that the civil service has engaged in various different courses, I'm just going to read some of them now. One of them, ironically, is called Give Me Strength, which I think we can all relate to. Find Your Mojo, yeah, all right. They do have courses on things like microaggressions and micro-behaviours. Some of those things are deemed to be quite woke. They also do appear to have various different courses when it comes to the LGBT community and the trans stuff and wearing rainbow-coloured lanyards. And you can maybe see why some people would look at that and go, well, the civil service, as a massive institution, clearly is quite woke. And also the grounds of impartiality have been blurred. The accusations are they maybe have been blurred in light of Sue Gray deciding to jump ship from the civil service role there to Chief of Staff at the Labour Party, if indeed that does come off.
Well, yes, and the other civil servant whose name is in the frame at the moment and is expected to probably go in a not very distant future is Simon Case, who's the Cabinet Secretary and who is at the centre of many of the WhatsApp messages between Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, and various members of that then government and civil servants. He was also had to recuse himself, if you remember, from the inquiry into Partygate because he was actually at one of the parties, which is why Sue Gray was appointed. So, I mean, of course, there are going to be people over whom there is a certain cloud and there are question marks. But don't forget the civil service includes a lot of junior staff. And many of those, if you go back to Partygate, and I know we don't want to go around that horse again, but, you know, a lot of the junior staff were fined and have been frightened. Yes. There is bullying. And the courses that you mentioned, Patrick, lots of organisations do that. I don't think you can say that makes it a bad organisation. The letter shouldn't have gone out in Suella Braverman's name. And next time, check it.
All right, Joe. Thank you very much, Joe. Joe Phillips there, who's a political commentator reacting to some accusations that the civil service is rather woke. Anyway, Gary Lineker says he's going to present Match of the Day on Saturday, but should he even be in a job? We've got all of the fallout from his explosive tweet about the government's migration policy, and I'm going to speak to the woman who he once called vile on social media. Little clue, you've met her before. And are we really friends with the French? That's Rishi Sunak's meeting with Emmanuel Macron tomorrow. This is GB News. I'm Patrick Christys.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, wonderful people. It's Patrick Christys here with you all the way through until 6 p.m. Here's what's coming up this hour. Gary Lineker, yes, he looks set to keep his job if the noise is on his Twitter account or anything to go by, but we will be looking at whether or not he should in light of his comments about the Tories' illegal immigration bill. In other news, Same but different, really. Are the French our friends or foe? Rishi Sunak has got a meeting with Emmanuel Macron. Emmanuel Macron appears to be making some rather loud noises about how he thinks we're going to break the law if we try to control our own borders. Who'd have thought it? And in other news, this one's a bit bizarre, actually. Is Zulu racist? Because apparently it is now, this is the film I'm talking about, apparently contributes towards inciting far-right extremism. I'll give you a clue. Michael Caine isn't happy, and that is a man you do not want to wind up. All of that coming your way and much more. Keep yourselves locked in. Yes, keep your emails coming in. gbviews@gbnews.uk. Gary Lineker is set to keep his job. Yeah, this hour we're going to be having that big Zulu debate, which is a phrase I never thought I'd say. Do you think Zulu can incite far-right extremism? gbviews@gbnews.uk. But right now, it's your headlines with Rory.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 4. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. Gary Lineker has been accused of diminishing the tragedy of the Holocaust, with the Home Secretary saying she found his comments offensive. Earlier this week, the BBC presenter compared the language used by the government as it introduced its new immigration policy to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Today, he described the fallout over his comments as ridiculously out of proportion and confirmed he will still be presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. The Culture Secretary, Lucy Fraser, says it is important the BBC maintains impartiality if it is to retain the trust of licence fee payers.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
Mr. Lineker spoke to reporters outside his home this morning and said he does not fear suspension by the BBC.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
Do you fear getting suspended?
No, normally, mate. What are you doing? Yes. Anything about the tweet, Gary? Sorry, what Do you about regret it? sending the tweet at all? No.
Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January, but the number waiting longer than 18 months in the same period has come down. A survey released today by the Royal College of Nursing shows a significant decline in the quality of patient care, as well as the well-being of nurses and midwives across England. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK, meaning there is a potential risk to life. Blizzard conditions continue to spread across the UK, with the Met Office warning that power cuts are likely, as well as travel delays and cancellations. The coldest temperature in March in more than a decade was recorded in the Highlands overnight, dropping to a low of -16 degrees. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, has been reconnected to Ukraine's energy grid after power was lost during Russian missile strikes. The plant was running on emergency diesel generators for the 6th time to prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. Ukraine's military says Russia fired 81 missiles, including 6 hypersonic missiles, on cities across the country. At least 9 people were killed in the strikes. Boris Johnson reportedly warned Dominic Raab privately about his conduct when he was Prime Minister. It is understood the ex-Tory leader has given evidence to the inquiry into allegations of bullying against Mr Raab. An independent lawyer is looking into complaints made by senior civil servants. The Daily Telegraph reports it is highly unusual for a former Prime Minister to be involved in a Downing Street investigation. Supermarkets have started dropping limits on customers buying certain fresh produce following widespread supply shortages. Asda has removed the cap on some fruit and vegetables, saying overall availability has improved and should be back to normal within a couple of weeks. Tesco, Aldi, Lidl and Morrison's also limited the purchase of some items. Retailers put shortages down to bad weather and transport problems in North Africa and Europe. 25-year-old singer Mae Muller will represent the UK at this year's Eurovision Song Contest. She'll perform at the event in Liverpool with the track I Wrote a Song. The contest is being held. The contest is being held in the Liverpool Arena on the 13th of May on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. Miss Muller has described it as a dream. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to Patrick.
All right, let's get on with people. So we start with the latest on Gary Lineker after he compared the government's migration policy to Nazi Germany. He told reporters that he stands by his comment and claims that he will present Match of the Day this Saturday. Well, Lineker has been criticised by a series of government ministers since his incendiary tweet on Tuesday when he said the language used by Home Secretary Suella Braverman was like that used by Germany in the 30s. Here's what happened when Lineker spoke to a group of reporters outside his home this morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary? Do you fear getting suspended?
No, morning, mate. What are you doing?
Yes.
Anything about the tweet, Gary?
Sorry, what
Do you
about
regret
it?
sending the tweet at all?
No. Do you stand by what you said? Sorry? Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
Well, he's obviously defiant about the whole thing, isn't he? Joining me now is our political reporter, Olivia Rutley. Olivia, what is the latest noises coming out of the BBC when it comes to Gary Lineker's incendiary tweet?
Well, the latest noises seem to be that they consider it the matter resolved, although there are definitely quite a few Conservative MPs who plan to fight this in some way, is the language that I'm getting out of some people in Parliament. Essentially, the BBC has decided, although still, I hesitate to say this too forcefully because there are contradictory reports, but it seems as though the BBC has decided that because Gary Lineker is a freelancer, because he's just a contractor and isn't technically employed by the BBC, he isn't subject to the same impartiality rules as its reporters, for example. Obviously, that is a bit of a tricky position to sustain because although Gary Lineker may not be technically employed by the BBC, he's seen by many as sort of synonymous with the BBC, almost a face of the BBC. So is it really possible to have your highest paid star come out and make these hugely, hugely inflammatory comments about government policy and to say that, well, it doesn't matter because he actually isn't really anything to do with the BBC, sort of washing their hands of him? Will that be sustainable? And as we can see, Gary Lineker is doubling down on his comments. And according to the Daily Mail, who've done a very interesting little roundup, this is the 10th time that he's made comments like this, where he's very on the nose sort of insulted government policy. And will he just keep doing that? And is that really sustainable?
Is it really sustainable? That's going to be the big question going forward, isn't it? Look, Olivia, thank you very, very much. Always great to have your inputs at the top of the hour. Olivia Rutley there, our political reporter. But in less than 5 months since Gary Lineker was found to have breached BBC impartiality rules over a tweet about the Conservative Party, and that wasn't the first time that he'd been in trouble for something he posted on Twitter. Back in 2021, he was heavily criticised for a tweet about GB News presenter Nana Akua. Now, Lineker wrote, "Find it hard to imagine how anyone could show such an extraordinary lack of empathy for our fellow human beings. Vile." Well, I'm delighted to say that Nana joins me now, and having known Nana for a while, I can confirm that Nana is definitely not vile. But, Nana, what do you make of all the latest goings-on?
Well, I find it astonishing that the BBC would attempt to say that because he's a so-called freelancer, that they're starting detaching themselves from his comments. Because I was a so-called type freelancer sort of thing, but then obviously I was forced onto the IR35 because they decided that because I have set shifts or set shows, I wasn't staff, but I was in a similar position to Gary in terms of my contract, obviously not a similar status. And when I went on the programme and made comments, the one that he commented about, when I went on shows and made comments, when I was working for the BBC, not the previous ones when I was with GB News. But I was told in no uncertain terms that the comments I made were unacceptable. And the second time I made a comment that the BBC didn't like, they took away 2 of my programmes. They told me that somebody like me with those comments do not suit the kind of programmes that I was presenting at the time. So, you know, I took it, I accepted that I had gone beyond what I was meant to be saying, and they were not happy with my comments, despite the fact that I too was not a member of staff. To me, it sounds like there is one rule for him and a totally different rule for others, and it is ridiculous. And then when he actually felt that he should be insulting me, I don't care what he calls me. Gary can call me whatever he likes. But when he's working for the BBC, I know that if I had done that and called somebody vile in my social media, or my other colleagues, who many of whom have been held up for saying something or writing something on social media and been told to retract what they've said. And in one case, I know very clearly, one person made a comment on one of Gary's tweets, and within moments, the bosses of that BBC channel had called up that person, who was not an employee, a freelancer, and told them to take it down, take their comment on Gary's comment down.
Yeah, indeed. And I'm looking at something here that you alluded to there, which is that HMRC does, in their view, see Gary Lineker as an employee of the BBC and not a freelancer. Of course, this is clearly the argument that he's having with them, so he disputes all of this. But in that sense, they are saying that he is an employee, and therefore it would, if he's found to be by HMRC, I mean, wouldn't that make him an employee, essentially, and therefore he would be subject to their impartiality rules? It seems a bit odd, Nana.
Well, I'd like to see him get out of that one. I just think he seems to be shielded with some sort of untouchability, some sort of Teflon coating, that he isn't allowed to say things who we would not be able to get away with. I knew that when I was there, I was not allowed to make political comment. That is why I left the BBC. As I said, I don't care. Gary can call me any names he likes. But whilst he's working there, he is clearly a BBC member. He works at the BBC. He is their highest paid presenter. He is prominently the BBC. At the time he called me vile, he had BBC Sport on his Twitter handle, on his Twitter profile. And how much more do you need to have to show that you are part of the BBC? They cannot. I don't think they can walk away from it. I think if they really want to sustain the confidence of the public that they have any level of impartiality, then they need to uphold their own guidelines. When people like Gary step outside them, they need to be brought down. I think it's time that he was sacked.
I mean, he can, it would appear, pick and choose his morals to an extent, Nana, because he didn't seem to mind getting paid a reported £1.6 million to help sports wash Qatar, which is a pretty vile, murderous regime, not exactly known for its human rights or women's rights or gay rights or anything. He did, of course, in recent times now make allusions to 1930s Germany when it comes to this country's treatment of illegal migration. He may well have presented TV shows in Qatar from a stadium built by slaves where slaves maybe died. So it would indicate quite strongly that he does appear to pick and choose what he gets on his high horse about, Nana.
Well, he's a total hypocrite. He's an absolute hypocrite. If he's serious about things like Qatar, then why on earth would you go if you feel that strongly about it? But of course, he seems to be able to take the money. I know at one point he took on a couple of refugees, so that sort of, or migrants or asylum seekers, or I'm not sure the terminology these days is all crossing into one. But he took on some refugees, so that he seems to think means that he holds the moral high ground. But you know, he can do what he likes in his spare time, but when he's working for the BBC and making comments like that, others would not get away with it. And that is my beef with it. He shouldn't be allowed to be making political comment on things that affect us as a people. We're paying for the licence fee, and all I ask, if I'm forced to pay for this thing, is that those who work there, first of all, are not paid ludicrous sums, and secondly, that they abide by a level of impartiality so they don't affect the politics of the day. Because that's not why they're there. They're there to give us an impartial representation of this country and give us things like sport. What on earth is he doing even talking about politics?
I mean, was there any kind of backlash? I know you said that you weren't particularly bothered about him calling you names or whatever, and I get that. But was there much of a backlash? I mean, did it create some kind of hate towards you at all?
Well, yes, it did. It did, actually. And, so obviously after that, I got death threats. I was called all the names under the sun. People were just sending me random messages on all my social media to let me know how evil I am for daring to support Priti Patel's turn back policy. He would have known that was happening because all of the retweets, all of the comments were literally littered with, would have had his hashtag on. I wrote to the BBC. I complained to the BBC. I wrote to Philip Burney, his boss, and Tim Davie. They wrote back basically telling me that, it was his own private comments, and he commented about what you said on October the 15th and blah, blah, blah. I had very clearly in the letter explained that there was no way that Gary could not have realised that I was what was happening and the backlash he was creating, but he wasn't bothered. All he had to do, if he was that bothered, was take down the tweet. But did he? Oh, no. And even to this day, I think the tweet is still there. But thankfully, Channel 5 took down any of the footage because obviously they had a duty of care. But Gary didn't care. And it's just like now, he's being caught out saying things that he shouldn't be saying, and he's literally smirking into his car. He doesn't give two hoots. He doesn't care. So if he's so empathetic and he's so caring, why would he do that? He would have known what his tweet would have done. It appears to me that he's enjoying it.
And you've led me on to my question now, which is, do you think he's a nice guy?
No, I don't. I think what he called me, I would say the very same to him. His behaviour is awful, and I think that he should apologise. He should apologise if his comments were offensive to the communities that are offended by it, but there's no sign of that. At the very least, the BBC should make sure that he apologises if he has caused offence, but oh no. They're all quietly getting behind him. I have no idea why that would be. Perhaps they're not happy with this government either. And they would also like to see perhaps a more favourable government that would like to see the BBC carry on being fully funded by us, the licence payers.
Just one final one with you, Nana, if that's all right. Is it symptomatic of potentially a slightly bigger problem when it comes to what some people might call quite wealthy lovies, right, which is that maybe they are a bit sheltered from it? Gary Lineker has taken a couple of people into his home. I do think he deserves an element of respect for that, of course. That is part of him maybe putting his money where his mouth is. However, the argument would be that some of those people would have been incredibly well vetted and were with him for a limited period of time. Radically different, for example, from the people of Linton-on-Ouse, or a small village where they were set to get hundreds and hundreds of people, many of whom you would imagine had not been particularly thoroughly vetted, dropped into their communities. So do you think he quite gets how a lot of the public really feel and, frankly, facing up to the genuine scale of this issue for normal people?
He hasn't got a clue. It's all very well if you've got a big old mansion where you can just give off one wing to people who you've never met before, but they've been vetted quite heavily, and you probably never even need to even speak to them, and you've got other people to cater for them. It's a totally different kettle of fish when a hotel is taken on by a load of people who are from a completely different place. They're migrants. There's nothing wrong with that, as people are people. But at the end of the day, that's different if they come and take over your village, they're next to your house, and you have to deal with the aftermath. And they're there for not months, but years. What I'd like to see is perhaps Gary Lineker should spend some time, firstly, on the Kent coastline to have a look at exactly, so he can understand what's going on. And secondly, perhaps he'd like to spend some time next to some of those migrant hotels or in some of those places where those hotels are, and spend some time with the locals there and see exactly what they're going through before he opens his mouth. And perhaps he could live in one of those communities for a while, and then maybe he'd understand. But hey, he can say what he likes and then go straight back to his mansion and forget about it.
Look, Nana, thank you very, very much. That's Nana Queer there, GB News presenter, and it's fair to say a fan favourite given what's been going on in the inbox whilst you've been talking. Nana, lovely stuff. All right, you take care. I'll see you soon. Yes, also as well, Gary Lineker was saying, wasn't he, that he was standing up for the marginalised people who don't have a voice. We are going to bring you a story soon anyway about Albanian TikTok human traffickers bringing video for people to pay £7,000 a pop to get in a speedboat and take a 45-minute journey across the Channel and into Britain. And some would say, well, maybe, perhaps, not all of them are indeed actually particularly poor and vulnerable. But look, gbviews at gbnews.uk is that inbox. I'm going to go into that now. Nana, lots of love for Nana. Love you, don't like Lineker. That was from Alison. Alison used slightly stronger terms there. than that. I'm just going to whiz you ahead to a couple of bits and bobs that I've got coming your way. Shortly, we are going to be talking about whether or not the French are our friends or our foe. There were some nice noises coming out from Emmanuel Macron towards Rishi Sunak, who appeared to be thinking that the adults had got back into the room in the wake of Boris Johnson's premiership. But now, in light of the illegal immigration bill, it does appear that the French have changed their tune and that the EU has changed its tune as well. They think that what we're doing is illegal, which is why Rishi Sunak is being asked non-stop now about whether or not he's going to try to stand up to some of the rules and regs that might be coming our way from foreign judges in foreign courts as to whether or not we can deport people, whether or not we have the right to do that. But shortly, I'm going to be having a big discussion about the film Zulu. That's right, whether or not it incites extremism. I know, I can't believe this either. But Michael Caine has hit back at claims that it encourages far-right sympathies. Yes, that's right. So Zulu could be the latest film to be banned. And even the dogs arriving at Crufts were this morning very, very cold, with a weather warning in place in large parts of the country. I'm Patrick Christys. This is GB News.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView, channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Welcome back, everybody. Now, in a few minutes, I will ask if the French are really our friends ahead of a meeting tomorrow between Rishi Sunak and Emmanuel Macron. They're expected to talk about plans to stop illegal immigration into this country, but the big news today is the UK government seems to be softening their stance on legal immigration, and they're hoping that overseas workers could be used to plug the labour shortage in the UK, and the British construction industry could be the first to benefit from more lax recruitment processes. Here in the studio is our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money. Yes, Liam, you've got some facts and figures for us.
This is the flip side of this ongoing immigration debate about small boats, Patrick. Obviously, this has dominated the headlines. You know, only Gary Lineker's getting coverage.
I know, yeah.
So, on Tuesday, of course, the government introduced this controversial illegal immigration legislation to try and stop the small boats. And the big question is, will we have to leave the European Convention on Human Rights? We'll come to that, because the flip side is that at the same time, business leaders are saying to the government, yes, but we need more people. There's a shortage of labour. We need people to fill certain jobs. And if you look at some numbers that I've prepared for you, we've still got 1.2 million job vacancies here in the UK. The workforce overall is about 30 million, so that's a pretty chunky hole that needs to be plugged. And there's a visa scheme that already allows for special visas, special entry for care workers, vets, civil engineers, graphic designers. These are particular areas where there's shortages of skills or people that are willing and want to do this work. The question is, the government is now considering they might extend that special visa scheme to include construction workers, hospitality workers and retail workers. And this is on top of the traditional agricultural seasonal schemes that we have when we get in the crops in the spring and the summer. And a government source has told me, Patrick, that no decision has been made on whether they're going to extend this legal visa scheme to ease legal migration to plug holes in the labour market. No decision is made, but this is now under active consideration. A real contrast with all the headlines that we've had about the illegal migration bill, ECHR and the sort of immigration culture wars.
Yeah, exactly. And just on that, I'm minded that you sat down with Suella Braverman, our Home Secretary. You've probably had more one-on-one time with her than, frankly, pretty much any journalist in the country, actually. Yeah. And you did talk to her about the ECHR, which is going to be dominating the discussions that Rishi Sunak will have with Emmanuel Macron tomorrow, and whether or not we are essentially bang out of order for trying to stop the boats.
It's worth just filling in a little bit of history here. I was very taken with your interview earlier with Eric Pickles about the Holocaust in the light of the Gary Lineker comments about the 1930s. Well, in the aftermath of the Second World War, in direct response to the atrocities, the human tragedy that was the Second World War, British lawyers and MPs got together and they wrote something called the European Convention on Human Rights. It totally remade the legal landscape of the European continent. And, of course, there's a court in Strasbourg, the European Court of Human Rights. The UK isn't just a signatory to the ECHR convention, it is the original signatory and basically the author of that. The thing is, though, under the ECHR, you can't deport somebody if they refer themselves to Strasbourg. They have to stay where they are while you undergo that, what can be a very lengthy legal process about their human rights, whether they're an asylum seeker, whether they're an illegal economic migrant, and so on. And this is the problem, because during that period, they can disappear into the workforce. We don't have identity cards in this country. You know, we're pretty low-key on keeping cyber tabs on people, though that's changing, of course. And so what Suella Braverman is trying to do, and this is somebody with a law degree from Cambridge, you know, somebody who's taken the New York bar exams as well. She's a very canny lawyer. They're trying to put through legislation which, in the words of Whitehall civil servants, does test the limits of what's internationally legally possible, that allows the British government to process those asylum and ECHR claims offshore. Not here in the UK. And offshore may mean Rwanda, another third country. So you don't have the cost of them being looked after here in the UK, and also so they can't disappear into the UK workforce and thus enter illegally and become permanently here illegally. The idea is if you process their claims elsewhere, that will be a deterrent to the people smugglers and the people getting in small boats and risking their lives. It's a very difficult legal circle to square, but that is what Suella Braverman is trying to do.
They are trying to do it, and yes, there we go. Look, Liam, thank you very, very much. Liam Halligan there, our wonderful economics and business editor, with all of that, running you through some of the legal and then illegal side of things as well. Right now, Rishi Sunak, on that note, is preparing to meet Emmanuel Macron. That's tomorrow. That's the first UK-France summit for 5 years. The Prime Minister and the French President will hold talks in Paris. They're expected to discuss these efforts to stop the small boats. That comes, of course, after Suella Braverman dismissed warnings from Brussels that the government's illegal migration bill violates international law. So I'm going to be looking at whether or not, basically, we are up for the fight when it comes to the EU courts, the European courts, I should say, and whether or not there will be any more detail on that. And later on as well, I'm going to be asking as well whether or not the film Zulu with Michael Caine is contributing towards far-right extremism, because, well, apparently it is. Michael Caine is not happy about that. I will be with you very, very shortly on that. Stay tuned after the news.
Good afternoon, it's 4:30, I'm Rory Smith. Gary Lineker has been accused of diminishing the tragedy of the Holocaust, with the Home Secretary saying that she found his comments offensive. Earlier this week, the BBC presenter compared the government's language as it introduced its new immigration policy to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Today, he described the fallout over his comments as ridiculously out of proportion and confirmed he will still be presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. The BBC is under some pressure to sack the former England striker. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser told the Commons the broadcaster must maintain impartiality.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January. The Met Office is warning that 3 amber warnings have been issued, meaning there is a potential risk to life. This is Blizzard Britain. It's supposed to continue over the next couple of days. Boris Johnson has reportedly warned Dominic Raab privately about his conduct when he was Prime Minister. It is understood the ex-Tory leader has given evidence to the inquiry into allegations of bullying. An independent lawyer is looking into complaints made by civil servants. The Daily Telegraph reports it is highly unusual for a former Prime Minister to be involved in a Downing Street investigation. Supermarkets have started dropping limits on customers buying certain fresh produce following widespread supply shortages. Asda has removed the cap on some fruit and vegetables, saying overall availability has improved and should be back to normal within a couple of weeks. Tesco, Aldi, Lidl and Morrisons also limited the purchase of some items. That's all from the GB newsroom. Now it's back to Patrick.
OK, all right, welcome back, everybody. I'm going to delve into the terrifying world of my inbox now. GBviews at gbnews.uk. Loads of you have been getting in touch, mainly actually to show a bit of support for Nana, our very own Nana, hired GB News presenter, who was speaking out about what her views are anyway, about Gary Lineker and his comments, of course, about the Conservative Party's illegal migration bill. What she's saying is essentially that he's, in the past, directed some quite considerable hate towards her and that he has demonstrated some considerable bias as well. Irene says that she thinks Nana is far more intelligent than Gary Lineker and that he should shut up. Afternoon, Patrick. I would like to say I don't watch the BBC anymore. After listening to you and Nana, it was nail on the head. And this is from Robert in Torquay. Look, loads of you getting in touch on that. Also, as well, of course, lots of you getting in touch about a topic that I'm going to be talking about a little bit later on. Now, believe it or not, you know the film Zulu, OK, with Michael Caine? Well, Zulu is now, supposedly, anyway, inciting far-right racism. Michael Caine has come out, I can't repeat the word that he used, but he has come out swinging against the idea that the film that he was in has indeed incited far-right racism. But we'll be having a discussion on that and whether or not, actually, Zulu is racist. this. Now, it's been claimed it encourages those far-right sympathies, but Michael Caine is saying it is indeed an absolute load of tosh. We're having a big debate on that. Get your views coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk, whether or not this is just more cancel culture, whether or not that is a stellar bit of British cinematography, and it should be upheld at all costs. I'm Patrick Christys, and this is GB News.
Hello, it's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. Tune in tonight at 8 p.m. for State of the Nation. Tonight, we'll be joined by my distinguished panel. The General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, Mr. Toby Young, is here along with the writer of The Spectator, Cara Kennedy. Former member of the London Assembly, Peter Whittle, is also joining me for a conversation. All the topics that truly matter and much, much more coming up at 8 p.m. on State of the Nation.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Click that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment.
I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
OK, welcome back. Now, the 1964 film Zulu is the latest target of woke activists after the movie was tied to far-right extremists in Prevent's latest report. Prevent, of course, is supposed to be that counter-terror stuff, isn't it? Which makes me wonder why on earth they're getting involved in this. But anyway, film star Michael Caine rubbished the claims that the picture led many to violence and extremism, stating defiantly, "There are no films I wish I hadn't made." So, is the film a bit of harmless fun or an outdated racist relic of times gone by? With me now is Bushra Sheikh, former BBC Apprentice candidate and anti-racism campaigner, and Benjamin Loughnane, research fellow at the Bow Group. Good stuff, both of you. Thank you very much. Bushra, is it fair enough that Zulu is now apparently on Prevent's radar?
Well, this is actually really interesting because if we look at Prevent as an anti-terror organisation, we can't call them woke. because with the same energy, if we're going to fight anti-Islamic extremism, we have to take what they say in a serious manner. And now they're making reference to 1964 Zulu, and I would probably agree. I mean, there is a racial undertone, and we do know what that film is about. But then this is a question about, are we going to censor everything? You know, so what energy are we going to use? Are we claiming that Prevent isn't a counter-terrorist organisation? When do we want to use them, and when do we not?
Just probably worth checking. Have you seen the film Zulu?
I've not seen the entire movie, but I do know what it's about, and I've seen clips of it as well. So we know it's about 150 British soldiers. We know it was about the kind of British imperialism going into South Africa, and the kind of racial undertones are present. We do know that. But, you know, at the same time, I'm not also the person to say that we should censor stuff. It is important to keep things like available, especially within film, that we can unpack and also examine.
OK. Benjamin, I'll bring you in now. Benjamin Lott, name research fellow at the Bow Group. A lot of people in my inbox are saying Zulu is a dramatic representation of a historic event that actually happened.
Yeah, it's a historical event. It's a historical battle. You might make a case that the Battle of Rorke's Drift was racist. I don't think it was. You know, it was a war. There's a war happens. It's not very nice, but it does happen. I don't think it was motivated by race. It was probably motivated by gaining land and improving their own lives, which is what most wars are motivated by. I don't think it was racial, but it's a film. It's not the actual battle. It's not happening in real life. It's on a screen. It's a fictional, representation of real events. To get offended by a film is absolutely ludicrous.
Do you think that potentially, Bushra, that if people are inclined to watch Zulu, a film that was made in 1964, and that leads them towards far-right extremism, I mean, is that actually something... Do you think that is actually something that happens? I mean, realistically, do you think people sit down and watch Zulu, which I think from memory tends to be shown almost every year around the December, Christmas time, and then that in itself incites people to go out and do unspeakable things, presumably to black people?
I mean, the honest truth is, look, Patrick, we know that any content in the wrong hands is going to be bad content. You know, we have to accept that that is a practicality of society. Whether somebody's going to sit down and watch Zulu and think, OK, I'm now going to become a far-right extremist, is probably very, very rare. But again, we have to question, this isn't about a woke agenda. We have Prevent, the organisation, saying that this could be inciting far-right extremism. So you have to decide, are we going to accept Prevent? Because I've had lots of people say to me, well, Prevent is absolutely right when it comes to Islamic extremism. So why is it not the case here?
Well, there is that point, Benjamin. I'll let you answer to that. I mean, Prevent have seen fit to get involved. This is a Prevent problem.
Yeah, I don't think they should be. I think they should stick to actual real instances of terrorism and violence and hate that, are serious. I don't think any moderate person has sat down, watched the film Zulu and then gone, do you know what, I'm going to become a racist now. I just don't see that playing out. I don't see it happening. And I think getting involved in these really petty things like policing what sort of films and what sort of media you can watch, and getting upset about certain songs. Like, I mean, we saw this with Tom Jones' song Delilah recently. They wanted to ban it at the rugby. It's like, why? Focus on actually dealing with real issues. Stop banning things which don't actually contribute to these problems.
Go on, Bushra.
Yeah, but that also, I just want to add that wasn't also something that Prevent, the organisation, raised. No. So, we have to question this 49 million year organisation that, the Shawcross report has said that this is not the only movie. So are we just going to denounce their findings and say that this isn't accurate? Because if that's the case, then you need to use that energy elsewhere as well.
I mean, Prevent has copped it a bit, Benjamin, for at times being accused of actually giving money to people who were, in favour of the Taliban, for example. So I can't help but wonder whether or not maybe they are just crowbarring in the film Zulu to try to provide some balance to the far right, potentially.
Yeah, and I think possibly it's a distraction tactic as well. These sorts of, outrages distract from the fact that Prevent haven't done the best job. I mean, there's quite a lot of things they haven't prevented. They've dropped the ball on a number of occasions. And I think talking about films is an easy cop-out for them rather than actually doing their proper job. Frankly, I think this whole thing is ridiculous, and we need to move on from this censorious trend that we've had for the past few years.
Would you ban the film Zulu, Bushra?
Sorry, Patrick, I just wanted to add, when it comes to far right and it comes to Prevent and the far right, it means that they're not doing their job properly. But when it comes to the mosque and it comes to places like Wakefield and Batley, then they are doing their job properly. The standard, we've got to have the same standard and the same energy. If there is a level of issues that could be raised in these movies, we have to question.
I would slightly countenance that, Bushra, with the idea that no one went and blew themselves up in the Manchester Arena after they watched Zulu, did they?
No, of course not. Of course not. And I'm not going to sit here and defend anybody that does that at all. But then in the same breath, you can't say that Prevent are not doing their job when it's on your turn. They are either doing their job or they aren't. Because when we cite that Prevent isn't doing the right job when it's our turn, somehow, we're trying to dismiss terrorism.
OK, well, Benjamin, I'll let you answer that then. So do you think that there is some bias here, which is that when people see that Prevent is going after certain aspects of the Muslim community, then people think it's doing a great job, but then it comes after a film like Zulu and people think, no, that's wrong?
Yeah, but look, Prevent needs to go after where there is terror, where there is hatred. That's their job. If it happens to be the fact that that exists within Islamic communities more so than it does in cinemas when you're watching the film Zulu, then they should focus on that. And I don't think they should have to give the appearance of going after every single community equally, because it doesn't occur in every community equally.
Right. Bushra, would you be up for a trigger warning on Zulu, do you think?
Up for a trigger warning? Honestly, if you're asking my personal opinion, no. I believe that there is some content, like Benjamin said, in theatre, in movie, and film, that we should keep. Again, is to unpack and examine kind of historical events, and I think they can be good for us. So I do share this energy where sometimes I think Prevent do get it wrong. I do genuinely believe that.
OK, and Benjamin, I'm assuming that the film Zulu will not be coming with a trigger warning if we watched it round at your place.
No, absolutely not. I think people should be trusted to form opinions based on what they see, and we shouldn't be wrapping people up in cotton wool and hiding the world from them. These are real events that happened historically, and we have to confront that, and we have to watch it, and we have to form opinions on the basis of that. And telling people, I'm going to give you a trigger warning, don't watch this, it might scare you or be offensive to you. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. You should be able to confront the realities of the world as an adult.
Good stuff, both of you. Thank you very much. Another stellar debate here. Bushra Sheikh there, former BBC Apprentice candidate and anti-racism campaigner, and Benjamin Loughnane, research fellow at the Bow Group, responding to the bizarre reality that apparently Zulu has piqued the interest of our Prevent counter-terror programme. So there we go. But in other news, the trial into the murder of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbel is continuing. That's at Manchester Crown Court. We've been bringing you regular updates on that shocking case. That case that, of course, gripped the nation. Thomas Cashman is charged with the murder of Olivia, who was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August. Now, I believe we can go now to our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper, who is outside Manchester Crown Court for us. Sophie, I believe, is there for us, outside Manchester Crown Court? No, maybe not. OK, all right. I believe I'll just go into the inbox then for a moment. No, there she is. Sophie, thank you very much. What's going on?
Well, Patrick, this afternoon we heard for the first time in this trial from the mother of Olivia Pratt-Corbel. That was in a pre-recorded video interview taken just a week after the attack in August of last year. Cheryl Corbel recounted that she and two friends were at her home having a cup of tea when they heard two loud bangs from the street outside. She went out to investigate, but when she realised what was taking place, she ran back to the safety of her front door, although she was followed by Joseph Nee, whom we now know was the intended victim of the gunman. She tried to keep the door shut, but she was forced to let go when she was shot in the wrist. She said that the blood was squirting everywhere. She also then recalled realising that Olivia was behind her. She said the baby, her nickname for her daughter, was sat on the stairs still. At this point in the interview, Miss Corbel was visibly heartbroken as she recounted realising that something was wrong. She said, "I lifted her top up and the bullet had gone right in the middle of her chest. I knew she'd gone." She also recalled Olivia gasping for breath and telling her that the ambulance would be there soon. She said she was screaming at her, "Stay with me." After that, the jury also heard a pre-recorded video interview with Olivia Pratt-Corbel's sister, Chloe. She recalled her mum screaming that Olivia had been hit and went on to describe seeing her mother try to stop the bleeding from Olivia's chest while she made that 999 call. Now, court has concluded for today, but is scheduled to resume tomorrow morning here at Manchester Crown Court.
Sophie, thank you very much for that update. Sophie Reaper outside Manchester Crown Court there in the case of Olivia Pratt-Corbel. There we go. Right, OK. Well, look, now some breaking news. Delays to some sections of HS2 to save money will shortly be announced by the government. It's been reported. Transport Secretary Mark Harper has said the government will delay building the Birmingham to Crewe leg of HS2 by 2 years. Grief. It's understood this will primarily affect the high-speed railway between Birmingham and Crewe and between Crewe and Manchester. So that, of course, is the breaking news for you there. We'll bring you more on it as we get it, but bad news for fans of HS2, if indeed there are any. A prominent British philosopher, moving on, and writer, has claimed that young women would rather change gender than say that they are lesbian. So Kathleen Stock is founding a group that intends to champion UK women who are same-sex attracted. Now, she resigned from her role as a University of Sussex professor following significant backlash to her belief that biological sex is fixed. And the highly controversial Tavistock Clinic, which provided a gender identity development service, is closing shortly. I'm joined now by Kate Harris, who is the co-founder of the LGB Alliance. Look, Kate, thank you very, very much. This is something that I know a lot of people have been talking about for a very long time, which is instead of maybe just taking a bit of time to figure out that people are either gay or lesbian, instead they are changing their physical form at a young age, and that is pretty bad for the kids.
Yeah, it's brilliant that Kathleen Stock and Julie Biddle have formed a new organisation today called the Lesbian Project. But she's right. I mean, if you first of all, let's say to all young lesbians out there, being a lesbian is fabulous. You can have a wonderful life. The trouble is that there's so much confusion now about what is a lesbian and what does it mean to be a lesbian. If I was a kid now at school, I would 100% be saying, oh, I think I have been in the wrong body. I think I'm a boy. I want to trans. And we have so many kids who come to us. One particularly sad case was a student who had been bullied at school from the age of 10 because she had short hair, she loved sports, she didn't do girly things. And every single one of her friends and people at school said, you're trans, you're definitely trans. And she said to us, she is waiting until she has an independent life. She's finished university, she's got her own flat, she's got her own income. She's waiting to come out to be a lesbian then because nobody can bully her.
Sorry, I mean, I was absolutely gripped by what you had to say there, and there's so many questions running through my mind. I'm going to just drill down, if it's possible, okay, to talk about... You said that if you think you were growing up now, and you were in school now, so at the age of 13 or something along those lines, do you think that you would have taken steps to transition and whatever that would have meant? So whether or not that was surgery or hormone blockers or whatever.
Patrick. I mean, it's so interesting. I've been reading Time to Think, Hannah Barnes' book about the scandal at the Tavistock. Unfortunately, I fit most of the categories of the kids who turn up for gender identity services. So I'm 100% sure I would have said, I wanted to be a boy. I was very lonely. I was very vulnerable. I dressed in my brother's clothes. In sports, I was put, when the class was divided, my teacher, Miss Higgins, called out, girls over there, boys and Catherine Harris over there. So it would be inevitable now that a very helpful teacher would take me to one side and say, you do know, Kate, that some children are born in the wrong body. And I would have leapt at the attention, the love, stunning and brave, 100%. And this takes us to the heart of the problem, Patrick, which is that at the moment, children like me are being fed a dangerous lie. We wouldn't say to children, you can fly, go and jump off that roof. But we do say to them, you can change sex. And that, to me, is the cruelest lie, and that leads to the situation where kids who are just gender non-conforming end up thinking that the solution to all their problems will be to change sex. It's dangerous, and it should stop really as soon as possible. Miriam Cates has asked for an inquiry into what kids are taught at school. It's not just about sex education. It's through schools now. many children are growing up to believe that everyone has a gender identity, and that leads to a basic confusion.
Yeah, I wonder as well. I'm becoming increasingly inquisitive about the idea of this kind of Munchausen by proxy situation as well, with parents potentially thinking, well, actually, my child, you know, is living their own intention-seeking fantasies, essentially, through their own kids. Like, look how special and unique my child is. They've been born into the wrong body. I think there's a bit of that going around as well.
I think that's true, and I think it's incredibly worrying, but that's why we need a full inquiry. We've got the Cass inquiry now into the scandal at the Tavistock, and that has been huge. We're leading the world. You know, the United Kingdom is often called Turf Island, and I'm proud of that, because we're the first country in the world to stand up and say, gender identity theory is nonsense. It's a cult belief. It is not facts. DFE says we should teach facts in school. If there are parents who've got Munchausen by proxy, let's challenge them, because what matters first is child safeguarding. This is a safeguarding issue. And I want there to be an inquiry into what's going on in schools across all subjects, because at the moment, I think our education system is positively dangerous for all children.
Okay.
And we are told of whole groups of girls now who say, I'm non-binary, I'm pansexual, I'm gender fluid.
Yeah.
You know, just leave these children alone to be whatever they want to be.
Yeah, it is a bit bonkers, some of the, you know, TikTok or YouTube explainers that you see now about all the different niches, and let me explain this to you, and you think, actually, good grief, you know, you're only confusing yourselves a lot of the time. I think, look, Kate, thank you very much. We're going to have to leave it there, but that's Kate Harris there, who's the co-founder of the LGB Alliance. I think saying what, frankly, a lot of people are actually thinking. So there we go. Now, should the BBC have sacked Gary Lineker for his tweet about the government's illegal migration bill? Stand by for a lively debate on that. And should the UK taxpayer be paying reparations for the country's role in the slave trade? A Labour MP thinks that you, the British taxpayer, should indeed be paying reparations, so tax money, to Caribbean nations to say sorry for what happened during the slave trade. This is GB News. I am Patrick Christys. I'll be back in a tick.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News. Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Hey, welcome back, everybody. It's Patrick, Christys here. It's 5 o'clock, and this is GB News. Here's what I've got coming up in the next hour. So, yes, it's still controversy around Gary Lineker. It looks as though the BBC might be taking absolutely no action whatsoever. So much for impartiality, some people would say. But in other news as well, talking of controversial things, are the French our friends? Rishi Sunak is going to go and meet Emmanuel Macron tomorrow. The French appear to be saying that what we want to do to stop the small boats crossing the channel is illegal. Rishi Sunak certainly has a fight on his hands. And yes, in other news as well, would you pay reparations for the slave trade? That's what one Labour MP wants you to do. Make sure you get in touch on all of that. But yes, we're going to be having a big discussion as to whether or not the British taxpayer should be giving money to the Caribbean. GBviews at gbnews.uk is, of course, that email address. Loads of you have been getting in touch on Gary Lineker. No surprise there. But yeah, this hour again, I want you to answer my question even, whether or not you would pay money for reparations for the slave trade. GBviews at gbnews.uk is that email address one more time now. It's Rory with your headlines.
Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 5. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. Breaking news in the last half hour. The Transport Secretary says construction of HS2 between Birmingham and Crewe will be delayed by 2 years. Mark Harper says it is due to increased costs and significant inflationary pressure. But Labour says the delay means the North has to pay the price for government failures. Gary Lineker has been accused of diminishing the tragedy of the Holocaust, with the Home Secretary saying she found his comments offensive. Earlier this week, the BBC presenter compared the government's language around its new immigration policy to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Today, he described the fallout as ridiculously out of proportion. The BBC is under some pressure to sack the former England striker, but he confirmed today he will be presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser told the Commons the broadcaster must maintain impartiality.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
Speaking outside his home this morning, Mr Lineker said he does not fear suspension from the BBC.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary?
Do you fear getting suspended?
No, I'm only, mate. What are you doing?
Yes.
Anything about the tweet, Gary? Sorry, what do you regret sending the tweet at all? No.
Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January. But the number waiting longer than 18 months in the same period has come down. A survey released today by the Royal College of Nursing shows a significant decline in the quality of patient care, as well as the well-being of nurses and midwives across England. The Prime Minister is looking to strengthen cooperation with France on tackling small boats in the English Channel. Rishi Sunak will meet French President Macron in Paris tomorrow. He is hoping to implement further measures to prevent illegal migrant crossing and target human trafficking gangs. It will be the first UK-France summit in 5 years. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK, bringing a potential risk to life. Blizzard conditions continue to spread across the UK, with the Met Office warning that power cuts are likely, as well as travel delays and cancellations. The coldest temperature in March in more than a decade was recorded in the Highlands overnight, dropping to a low of -16 degrees. Boris Johnson reportedly warned Dominic Raab privately about his conduct when he was Prime Minister. It is understood the ex-Tory leader has given evidence to the inquiry into allegations of bullying against Mr Raab. An independent lawyer is looking into complaints made by civil servants. The Daily Telegraph reports it is highly unusual for a former Prime Minister to be involved in a Downing Street investigation. The Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, the largest in Europe, has been reconnected to Ukraine's energy grid after power was lost during Russian missile strikes. The plant was running on emergency diesel generators for the 6th time to prevent a potentially catastrophic meltdown. Ukraine's military says Russia fired 81 missiles, including 6 hypersonic missiles, on cities across the country. At least 9 people were killed in the strikes. It's been confirmed that 25-year-old singer Mae Muller will represent the UK at this year's Eurovision Song Contest.
Instead I wrote a song about how you did me wrong. I could have cried at home and spent the night alone.
She will perform at the event in Liverpool with the track I Wrote a Song. The contest is being held in the Liverpool Arena on the 13th of May on behalf of last year's winners, Ukraine. Miss Muller has described it as a dream. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Patrick.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Now, loads to get through this hour, and we start with the latest on Gary Lineker. After he compared the government's migration policy to Nazi Germany, he has told reporters today that he stands by his comments and claims he will present Match of the Day this Saturday. Well, the former England captain has been criticised by a series of government ministers since his incendiary tweet on Tuesday, when he said the language used by Home Secretary Suella Braverman was like that used by Germany in the 30s. Here's what happened when Lineker spoke to a group of reporters outside his home this morning.
Do you regret the tweet, Gary? Do you fear getting suspended?
No, I'm all mate. What are you doing?
Yes.
Anything about the tweet, Gary?
Sorry,
Do you regret sending the tweet at all?
No. Do you stand by what you said?
Sorry?
Do you stand by what you said in your tweet?
Of course.
OK, all right, but should the Match of the Day host get the red card over his asylum policy outburst? To discuss this further, I'm now joined by journalist and broadcaster Angela Epstein and sports journalist Harry Harris. Right, Harry, I'll start with you, if that's all right. So what do you make of all of this stuff now? Because obviously it's massively controversial. Gary Lineker pretty confident nothing's going to happen to him.
Yeah, it's a bit of a media witch hunt against him, obviously. You can see that. He's making all the news. But he's a bit of a, he's a bit of a Twitter twit, isn't he? Coming out with these remarks, absurd comments he's making. But, we all believe in freedom of speech. Should he be making them? Well, impartiality rules within the BBC. It's not the first time. Come on, it's about the 4th or 5th he's breached those impartiality rules. And this guy never got a yellow card in his entire playing career. Yeah. He's not likely to get a red card now.
Yeah, so good footballing analogy there, of course. Some would argue that he scored an own goal. But there we are. I suppose there is a difference, though, Angela, I'll bring you in now, between freedom of speech and having a political view, whether or not that's even allowed, but also just being downright offensive towards the Jewish community, which is what some people have accused him of being. Angela, your views?
Yeah, OK, well, I think that he's just being so incredibly arrogant. I absolutely believe in free speech and the right to express your opinion. The conversation about impartiality is very, very relevant because he's on the BBC payroll. He's one of their highest paid stars. And if the BBC are going to continue to convince us that as the state broadcaster that their presenters are impartial and unbiased, then they have to rule down heavily on this. But I think it's also about the nature nature of the conversation that he's triggered, because I know he's fired off his mouth before, and you can just see by the optics of that clip there. There's a kind of air of invincibility about him. He's hugely popular. He's got a huge following. But I think if only he could just hold his hands up and say, on this one, boss, I was wrong, for two very quick reasons. First of all, the Holocaust, as I've said before, possibly on this programme, Patrick, is the darkest moment in human history. It is singular in what Nazi Germany was attempting to achieve. Innocent people in their millions, 6 million Jewish people, but also gypsies, political detractors, people who were pursued because of their sexuality, were thrown in gas chambers, were deported from ghettos simply because of who they were. So it actually undervalues the importance of Holocaust education when you sling it around as just a kind of casual tweet. And the other thing is, because of all this, so what Gary Lineker is trying to say, rightly or wrongly, in terms of his impartiality, has been drowned out by his choice of analogy. So he's not really servicing the cause either.
Well, I think
remembering what he said, we're thinking about the fact that he was so catastrophically, grotesquely inappropriate in his choice of analogy.
I think that's the thing, certainly for me, which is I'm not particularly bothered. All right, BBC impartiality stuff, but to be honest with you, I think that ship sailed quite a long time ago. For me, it's more about the idea of what he said in terms of it being offensive towards the Jewish community. And I don't think that's getting enough traction, actually. But, Harry, look, from a sports journalist perspective, OK, would Match of the Day be any less well-viewed if Gary Lineker just wasn't there? My point being, would it be a commercial disaster for the BBC if they said to him, look, Gary, you've broken impartiality rules, you're off?
Well, it's a good point, that, because in my view, I was going to make this point anyway, I think they're grooming Jermaine Genius for the Gary Lineker role. And I think the BBC are going to wait for all of this to die down. And I think very, very, very soon, in the near future, I think there will be a change at Match of the Day. I agree with that point. You know, Match of the Day is the institution, not Gary Lineker. He is probably the best, certainly one of the best presenters in football. There's no doubt about that. He has a certain charm on air. You know, he's very clever with what he says. But, you know, it's the football that drives the audience. It's the programme, and the Match of the Day is the institution, not Gary Lineker. And I can see Jermaine Genius, who's been presenting on other programmes as well, as his successor now, probably sooner rather than later.
And that's what, Harry, I'll just stick with you before I go back to Angela on this, because in that sense, realistically, is he worth the controversy for the BBC? Harry?
No, he's not. I don't think so. I think, you know, he's embarrassing the BBC to a large extent, but I think he's also embarrassing himself. You know, he should show some kind of attrition for about what he said. He should apologise. It was out of order. I'm Jewish myself, and should I take offence? I'm not taking offence. It's just absurd. It is nothing in relation to reality. We don't like what the Tory policies are, but we can't come up with a better one. Perhaps we should send Gary Lineker to France.
OK. Look, Angela, how important is it for you that Gary Lineker maybe recognises or understands that... All right, Harry's saying he's not particularly offended by it. It's fair enough, of course it is. But quite a lot of people are. How important do you think it is that he understands the offence that he has actually caused to some sections of the Jewish community?
Yeah, I mean, this is not, I mean, OK, I respect Harry's right to take offence or not. This is more, that would be a very kind of selfish thing for me to say. It's all about my personal offence. It's not. It's about the responsibility that goes with the word. So taking offence doesn't really get anybody anywhere, and I'm not into cancel culture. What I'm saying is Holocaust education is such an uphill struggle. I've been involved with the Holocaust charity for over 10 years, and I've met many survivors. I've met their families. I have close friends whose parents were survivors. I've sat around the dinner table with them and listened to their jaw-dropping stories. And their biggest thing is, please don't let our suffering be forgotten. Please let the human race learn from the evil which completely overran Europe during the Second World War. And when you get the likes of Gary Lineker, who obviously has just got no understanding of history, bandying it around in the way that he has as a casual soundbite, then he denudes that and he makes Holocaust education even more difficult. And that's where I'm coming from. It's not about personal offence. Yes, it is offensive, but I'm not asking him for him to be cancelled. I'm asking him, because he's a person of influence, to hold up his hand. Say, I'm really sorry. I'd love to sit down with a Holocaust survivor or somebody who came over on the Kinder transport and understand, in particular, Kinder's transport, because they'll have come from Germany. What was it like during the 1930s? What was it like having posters on Jewish shop windows and people beating up people randomly in the street because they were Jewish or others? I'd like him to understand that, and maybe if he heard it firsthand, he might not have been so free and easy with his analogies.
OK, look, both of you, thank you very, very much. Great stuff, that. Really interesting to get both perspectives there. That is journalist and broadcaster Angela Epstein and sports journalist Harry Harris. I'm just going to delve into my inbox on this before I go to our next topic, because you are not going to believe, of course, as well, that one of the latest tactics that people smugglers are using to get people across the channel. This is remarkable. But earlier today, actually, the Leader of the House of Commons, Penny Mordaunt, accused Labour of borrowing from his playbook by being the party of goal hangers in a row over the government's asylum policy. Lineker has responded to Mordaunt by tweeting, "Thank you for mentioning me in your clumsy analogy. I'm just happy to have been better in the 6-yard box than you are at the dispatch box. Best wishes." Right, I did mention earlier on about the latest craze, really, which is sweeping TikTok. No, it's not a new dance. It's criminal gangs doing marketing for people trafficking businesses, and some trips are reportedly being advertised in... Actually, I've seen some of these videos. The tech that goes into them is quite good. For £7,000 for what they say is a 45-minute journey over to the UK. But if anyone can afford 7,000 big ones to cross the channel, can they really be considered poor and vulnerable? Or should we be going after the gangs who are making a killing this way? Joining me now is immigration lawyer Harjap Singh Bangal. Harjap, thank you very much. A lot of people will be watching and listening to this now thinking, I don't have £7,000. These people don't really deserve too much of our sympathy if they can afford that to get to Britain.
Right, well, the question we need to be asking is how come GB News, with an excellent piece of investigative journalism, can find these videos about TikTok and find out where the gangs are? And why in 20 years can the government say we can't find the gangs? And why did Rishi Sunak the other day just say, well, I've tried my best to get the gangs, I can't now, so we're going to have to detain every single migrant that comes along. We're going to have to keep them in for 28 days. We're going to have to send them to countries where we haven't even got return agreements. It just seems, is there a lack of political will? For 20 years, you can't find the gangs, and GB News has found them in one day on TikTok. Come on, I mean, it's pretty lame, isn't it?
Well, the other kick in the metaphorical nuts for a lot of people will be to learn. There's the reasons why we're not playing these videos, by the way, because obviously it's got people's faces in and stuff like that, and there are potential consequences to doing that. But some of these videos appear very much to be shot by, like, Big Ben in London, and you can clearly see people in some of them, which would imply that a lot of these people running the operations are, well, pretty much around the corner from where I am now. And if we can spot this, why can't the government just get involved and go, all right, well, we'll lift you, and then hopefully this will stop?
There was a recent news report this week in which a migrant who was going to be trafficked over actually said, he goes, actually, your gangs are more closer to home than what they are. And about 3/4 of the gangs are actually based from the UK. Now, to arrest someone in the UK, we don't need to ask anyone else's permission. We need to go after these gangs, just the same way we go after drug smugglers. And we've discussed this before, Patrick. Why are the gangs not in jail? It's easier to lock up 10 gangs and jail them for life than it is to detain 50,000 people and try and send them to Rwanda. We can't even send 200 people to Rwanda at the moment, not even one person, and we've spent 140 million on it. If we'd have spent 140 million on catching these gangs who are advertising brazenly on TikTok, which shows one of two things. Either one, they're not afraid, or two, that they know the government's not going to come after them. Now, why would they know the government's not going to come after them?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this lot just don't care, do they? But I've got to ask you, if somebody is found to have paid at least £7,000 for a 45-minute joyride across the channel, and presumably however many other thousands of pounds as well, just to get to the point where they're at a beach about to cross the channel, do you think that completely diminishes, from a legal perspective, the idea that they're a victim of modern slavery, or indeed that they are, in massive need of refuge here?
With the refugee and asylum status, I mean, to be fair, people do pay to leave their country of origin if they're desperate. But it doesn't add credibility to the fact that, hold on, that why would you need to pay to come from France to come here? So I think the key here is, the fact is, let's kill off the supply and there'll be no people, there'll be no end users. What the government's trying to do, Patrick, and we talked about this before, is they're trying to lock up all the drug users and hope that drug dealers stop. And today, your investigation and news report has shown that actually that's not working. We need to catch the people smugglers who are in the UK. Some are based on the French coast. They've been using the same route for the last 20 years. We can find them on TikTok. You can find them on TikTok. The government are like, don't know, Gov, don't know where they are. They're too clever for us. In which case, sort of ask the question, exactly what is the government doing? Are they honest in their intentions? Are they speaking the truth? Why can't we set up an elite unit like MI5 or something like that to catch these gangs? It didn't take you, what, half a day to find them?
No, and also the shocking thing is, Archie, I don't even think you need an elite unit. I'm pretty sure if you gave us half a day, you and I could just knock on someone's door and go, is it you in this video? All right, do you want to come with us? But look, Harjap, thank you very much. Always a pleasure, my good man. Take care. Harjap Singh Bangal, their immigration lawyer, just reacting to the fact that there are now loads of TikTok videos doing the rounds, advertising that for £7,000 you can get in a speedboat and take a 45-minute journey across the channel, where you will, of course, be welcomed with open arms into Britain. It does, I think, for a lot of people, diminish the idea that every single person coming over here on a boat is indeed poor and desperately needy and vulnerable. If someone has £7,000 just to toss towards what appears to be an Albanian human trafficker, then potentially they are not that needy. GBviews at gbnews.uk, though. Get your views coming in. Big news today, though. Big news as well. The Oscars could be about to go gender neutral. That's right. I'm Patrick Christys, and I will be back very shortly with the wonderful Christys Schofield, stateside. This is GB News.
First and foremost, I'm a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
And this Saturday, we've got an exclusive interview with the Chancellor.
I'm not going to have another leadership campaign.
Well, never again. You might do.
No, never again.
We'll be asking him about corporation tax rises, energy prices. We'll also be asking him about his time as Secretary of State for Health and Chairman of the Health Select Committee, and whether or not we should have had such a fierce lockdown.
It's an interview that you can't miss, so join us this Saturday, 10 to 12 on GB News, the People's Channel.
OK, welcome back, everybody. I have got a lot coming away in just a matter of a moment. Should we pay, as taxpayers, reparations for the slave trade? One Labour MP is saying that you, me, everyone we know, should put our hands into our pockets and take out a few quid and send it to the Caribbean to say very sorry about what went on during the slave trade. Where do you stand on that? Also, the Oscars is going to go gender neutral, supposedly, so we'll be talking to Kinsey Schofield stateside about all of that. And as I understand it, we are about to win Eurovision with our latest entry. Some people would say that maybe we should belt that song off the White Cliffs of Dover and it might make some people turn around. But on that note, Rishi Sunak is preparing to meet Emmanuel Macron tomorrow in the first UK-France summit for 5 years. The Prime Minister and the French President will hold talks in Paris, where they're expected to discuss joint efforts to stop the small boats leaving French shores. It comes as Suella Braverman dismissed warnings from Brussels that the government's illegal migration bill violates international law. Basically, to get right to the very crux of this, I am asking whether or not the French are our friends, because it sounded like Macron was a big fan of Rishi Sunak. He was happy that he wasn't Boris Johnson. But now we want to do something to stop the boats, and Emmanuel Macron's saying, no, it is illegal. So, here we go. David Chazan is a Paris-based journalist with The Times, and he joins me now. Thank you very much, David. Great to have you on the show. So, is the French government our friends?
Well, they certainly say that they want to be our friends, and they see Rishi Sunak being in Downing Street as an opportunity for a complete reset of bilateral relations and indeed relations with the whole of the EU. Now, as you referred to in your intro, under Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss, relations deteriorated very badly, and under Boris Johnson, Macron and Johnson reached a point where the relationship had become so bad that they were barely on speaking terms. And the view in Paris, and I have this from aides of Macron and senior French civil servants, is that Boris Johnson, in their view, just couldn't be trusted. You couldn't do business with him, you couldn't make a deal with him because you couldn't trust him to keep his promises. Now, Rishi Sunak is very similar to Emmanuel Macron in some ways. Both of them are in their 40s with a background in finance. They've both got an eye for detail, and they both appear to put the hard work in to get into the nitty-gritty and the small print. So the signs are pretty good ahead of tomorrow's summit.
OK, what would it actually mean for Britain if Emmanuel Macron decided to kick up a stink about this? Because as far as we can tell, Rishi Sunak is planning on ploughing ahead with the illegal immigration bill anyway, and he's, quotes, up for the fight when it comes to it. So does it really matter if Emmanuel Macron decides that he's not happy about it?
Well, I don't think it's Emmanuel Macron. I think the fight would be with Brussels, with the EU rather than France, because Macron is fiercely pro-EU and he would want any policy or any sort of action taken by the EU vis-à-vis Britain to come from the EU as a bloc rather than coming bilaterally from France.
OK, all right. Well, we await with bated breath as to what exactly happens. But look, David, thank you very much. I'm aware that we kept you waiting for a little while there, so I just want to say thank you so much for your insight. David Chazan there is a Paris-based journalist with The Times, just whizzing you through a little look ahead to what we can expect from Rishi Sunak meeting Emmanuel Macron tomorrow. Now, the trial of the man accused of murdering 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbel is continuing at Manchester Crown Court. Thomas Cashman is charged with the murder of Olivia, who was shot inside her home in Liverpool last August. Let's go now to our North West reporter Sophie Reaper, who is outside Manchester Crown Court with the details of what was going on in there today. Sophie.
Well, this afternoon we heard for the first time in this trial from the mother of Olivia Pratt-Corbel. That was via a pre-recorded video interview that was taken just a week after the attack that took place in August of last year. Cheryl Corbel recounted what happened that night. She said 2 of her friends and herself were enjoying a cuppa at her house when they heard 2 loud bangs outside. She went out to investigate, but when she realised what was going on, she ran back to the safety of her front door, but she was followed by Joseph Nee, who we now know was the intended target of the gunman. She tried to keep the door shut to prevent him from coming inside, but she was forced to let go when she was shot in the wrist. She said that blood was squirting everywhere. She then recalled realising that Olivia was behind her. She said the baby, her nickname for her daughter, was on the stairs, sat still. At this point in the interview, it was clear that Cheryl Corbel was heartbroken as she recounted realising that something was wrong. She said, "I lifted her top up and the bullet had gone right in the middle of her chest. I knew she'd gone." She also recalled her daughter gasping for breath and telling her that the ambulances would be there soon. She said she was screaming at her, "Stay with me." After that, the jury then saw a pre-recorded video interview with Olivia Pratt-Corbel's sister, Chloe. She recalled her mother screaming that Olivia had been hit and went on to describe seeing her mum, Cheryl, try to stop the bleeding from Olivia's chest with a towel as she made that 999 call. Now, the court has concluded for the day with this Thomas Cashman trial. He, of course, denies all of the charges that he's facing, and we're expecting that to resume tomorrow morning here at Manchester Crown Court.
Yes, indeed. Look, Sophie, thank you very much for bringing us the detail on that. That's Sophie Reaper, who's been outside Manchester Crown Court for us, just on the latest in that incredibly disturbing case. I'm just going to go into the inbox very quickly, which is to tease, actually, what I've got coming up shortly, which is going to be our discussion as to whether or not you, the British taxpayer, would feel comfortable putting your hand in your pocket and paying reparations for the slave trade. A Labour MP thinks that you should, and that money should go towards the Caribbean. A lot of people are saying, no, absolutely, I would not fancy doing it. Agatha's been on, who says that, no, maybe we should... we already paid enough when it came to actually stopping the slave trade. There's rather a lot of that going on. It's about time that people got over it, says Graham. People need to move on. I have not in any way benefited from said slave trade. That is Graham's view, of course. GBViews at GBnews.uk, keep them coming. But it is the discussion we're going to be having because the slave trade, hundreds of years ago, has been and gone, a lot of people would say, and the Labour MP thinking that we should dip our hands into our pockets and pay some kind of reparations for it. A lot of people are saying, no, we don't have the money and we don't have the inclination either. We'll be talking about that. And on the day that Crufts opens, yes, that's right, we will ask, should you have to sit an exam before you get a dog? And also the Oscars as well. Apparently the Oscars are going to go gender neutral. Why not? Everyone else appears to be. But now, though, here's your headlines with Rory.
Good afternoon. It's 31 minutes past 5. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. The Transport Secretary says construction of HS2 between Birmingham and Crewe will be delayed by 2 years. Mark Harper says it is due to increased costs and significant inflationary pressure. But Labour says the delay means the North has to pay the price for government failures. Gary Lineker has been accused of diminishing the tragedy of the Holocaust, with the Home Secretary saying she found his comments offensive. Earlier this week, the BBC presenter compared the government's language as it introduced its new immigration policy to that used by Germany in the 1930s. Today, he described the fallout over his comments as ridiculously out of proportion and confirmed he will still be presenting Match of the Day on Saturday. The BBC is under some pressure to sack the former England striker. Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser told the Commons the broadcaster must maintain impartiality.
As somebody whose grandmother escaped Nazi Germany in the 1930s, I think it's really disappointing and inappropriate to compare government policy on immigration to events in Germany in the 1930s. It's important for the BBC to maintain impartiality if it is to retain the trust of the public who pay the licence fee.
The number of people in England waiting to start routine hospital treatment has risen slightly, level with the previous record high. NHS England says around 7.2 million people were waiting to start treatment at the end of January. But the number waiting longer than 18 months in the same period has come down. A survey by the Royal College of Nursing shows a significant decline in the quality of patient care, as well as the well-being of nurses and midwives across England. The Prime Minister hopes to strengthen cooperation with France on tackling small boats crossing the English Channel. Rishi Sunak will meet French President Macron in Paris tomorrow. He is aiming to implement further measures to prevent illegal migrant crossings and target human trafficking gangs. It will be the first UK-France summit in 5 years. Amber weather warnings for snow and ice are in place for parts of the UK until tomorrow, bringing with it a potential risk to life. Blizzards are due to cause treacherous conditions with 50-mile-per-hour winds and 40 centimetres of snow forecast for some areas. The Met Office is warning that power cuts are likely, as well as travel delays and cancellations. The coldest temperature in March in more than a decade was recorded in the Highlands overnight, dropping to a low of minus 16 degrees. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now it's back to Patrick.
Yes, that big discussion about whether or not we should pay reparations for the slave trade is just around the corner. But, in other news, the winner of this year's Oscars for Best Actor and Actress might be the last, because the Academy Awards could be moving towards more gender-neutral terms. Great. It comes as the Academy Awards are facing mounting pressure to follow this year's Grammys by replacing all male and female awards with Best Performer or Best Performance. Well, to shed some more light on this, I am very happy to be joined by the epic showbiz reporter, it's Kinsey Schofield. Kinsey, good to see you again. Fantastic stuff. And what's going on then? Is there much of a clamour for this, really?
Unfortunately, Patrick, there is. I think it's the Los Angeles Times that called the Best Actress category sexist and outdated, which is, I mean, ludicrous, because if you look at the statistics in the last decade, women have had less than 34% of the dialogue in films. 40% have been, had the starring role in movies. So I think that if you have women and men up against each other, what are the odds that a woman is going to walk away with that award when they really don't have enough content to work with?
I mean, do you think this would end up disadvantaging men or women more, really, or is it just hard to know?
I do think it would end up damaging women more because, like I said, just statistically, you're going to go see a movie with The Rock. You're going to go see a movie with Brad Pitt, Leonardo DiCaprio, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon. I mean, when you think of movie stars, I think that you can name like 20 men, and I really don't think that that the women can. I mean, Reese Witherspoon. I think of Reese Witherspoon, Nicole Kidman, but I do think that the men outweigh the women in this scenario. It was Goldie Hawn that told Variety magazine this month, that the Oscars have become too politicized, and they lack glamour and they lack class. I think that this would be a damaging mistake that they could make. In 2021, only 10 million people watched. In 2022, 16 million, but we all know we tuned in because of the slap. I mean, I'm completely guilty of it. Yeah. That's when I was like, oh, let's turn the Oscars on. Will Smith has been assaulted, or Will Smith is assaulting. But I do think that this would be very damaging towards them. People are tuning out because they're just like, oh, you guys are going to high-five each other. It's not really the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, I think it does more to erase women than promote any kind of rights whatsoever. I mean, when we was the Brit, Sam Smith decided to come out as whatever he is, and this was before we did an impression of a honey roast ham, but he's
a fish of them, Patrick. Don't forget.
He's a fisher. He's a couple of things. I'm not sure if he's a fish of them, but yes. And so, who is this actually appealing to? Because for the sake of this massive hoo-ha and change, does it not deny potentially women the right to, get their glad rags on and go and win an award for being the best actress. Some women want to be an actress. They don't want to be an actor them.
I mean, absolutely. And if there are so many people that don't identify as something specific, then why don't we create a category for them versus eliminating the female category and eliminating something that women have fought very hard for? I mean, you go to 1 million auditions to get your first gig, and then you've got to crawl up this impossible, the task to become a movie star is insane. And so I just think that it really does erase women, and we should elevate women. It's so funny that this is coming out the day after International Women's Day. They're like, yay, women. By the way, you don't matter.
Yeah, so true. Such a good point. Look, Kinsey, thank you very, very much. Great to have you on. No doubt I'll be speaking to you again in just a matter of hours, probably. I was, of course, Kinsey Schofield there, just in reaction to the fact that the Oscars is supposedly going to go gender neutral. Well, we'll have to wait and see whether or not they actually do it, but there we go. Anyway, should we have to give money to countries affected by the slave trade hundreds of years ago? A Labour MP says that we should. Do you think that you should have to pay more in tax to give to places like the Caribbean because of the slave trade? I'm Patrick Christys, this is GB News, and that's next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236,
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
All right, well, the latest bonkers things to come out of British politics is that Labour MP Clive Lewis has called on the government to open negotiations with its former colonies in the Caribbean to discuss reparations for the British Empire's role in the slave trade. The call follows the example of the Trevelyan family who travelled to Grenada last year to apologise for their family's role in enslaving 1,000 Africans on the island. With me now is Rafe Haydel-Mancu, who is a royal broadcaster and commentator. Rafe, thank you very much. It's kicked off in the inbox about this. Do you think the British taxpayer should pay to say sorry for the slave trade that was hundreds of years ago?
Absolutely not. You know, it's enough of this self-flagellation. It's time that Britain stopped apologising and stopped being lectured and made to feel guilty by these fringe radicals like Clive Lewis. One might ask why he's not protesting, you know, outside the embassies of Chad or Mali or Sudan or Nigeria, which currently have horrific levels of slavery in them. And it's funny how Mr. Lewis and all of his ilk are mysteriously silent about those current atrocities. You might think they've got an ulterior agenda behind them, and it's not really slavery that's the issue. Look, if we were having this discussion, 200 years ago, of course we'd be in favour of reparations for slaves who were directly affected. But this is 2023. We're talking about 6 or 7 generations later, the great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren of slaves. And the cold, hard facts for Mr. Lewis are that the descendants of slaves living in the Caribbean have a far better quality of life than they would have had if their ancestors had remained in Africa. Because Britain's Caribbean possessions, unlike West Africa where the slaves come from, are now middle-income countries. So the Bahamas has a GDP per head which is comparable to Spain and Italy, and it's higher than Portugal, which actually had many more slaves shipped than Britain ever did. You can look at Barbados or St. Kitts and Nevis or Antigua. They've all got higher rankings amongst the UN Human Development Index than Brazil or Mexico or many of the countries colonized by the Spanish. And then if you compare that and contrast that with the countries of West Africa from where the slaves originally came, well, look at Benin, for example. The GDP per capita of Benin here, I've got, is $1,430 per year. In Barbados, it's 17,000. That's 10 times higher. And life expectancy in Benin is 62. In Barbados, it's 79. So yes, slavery was abhorrent, but for those who were enslaved. But had they stayed in Africa, their 21st century descendants today would be living dramatically worse lives. Get a grip.
OK, what about the old Barbary slaves as well? Because if we're doing the reparations thing, then maybe they could go the other way.
Yeah, absolutely. What about the Barbary slaves? Well, over 1 million white people were brought into slavery in the Barbary slave trade. And also, what about the demands made for Africans to pay reparations? Why isn't Mr. Lewis actually asking for Nigeria or Benin to pay reparations to people in the Caribbean? Because, of course, the white slavers had their ships moored off the coast and they didn't venture inshore. They purchased slaves that had been captured by other Africans, and there were more slaves held in bondage and in slavery in Africa than were ever transported across the oceans. And actually the slave trade continued far longer. The Islamic slave trade of African slaves carried on well into the 20th century. And modern day slavery, of course, exists. There are more slaves in bondage today than there were at any time under the British Empire, with Pakistan actually being the worst culprit in all of this. And then again, of course, why should British taxpayers pay for slavery reparations when only 3,000 people in this country ever owned slaves? The majority of British people in this country descend from people who lived lives of abject poverty, terrible hardships, akin to serfdom.
I mean, it's strong stuff, Rafe. Thank you very much for enlightening us all with that. It's Rafe Haydel-Mancu, as ever, a wonderful addition to any show. He's a royal broadcaster and commentator and historian as well, in case you couldn't tell. Right, we're moving on now, something a little bit different, because dog attacks recorded by police have risen by more than a third in the past 5 years. And across England and Wales, there were nearly 22,000 cases of out-of-control dogs causing injury last year alone. Well, the UK's dog population has risen by almost 15%, and that is since 2018. But what can be done to curb this sharp rise in attacks? And some people are suggesting that owners should sit an exam before they can legally own man's best friend. Well, someone who was left, very unfortunately, with facial injuries after being bitten by a dog in 2021 and missed 2.5 months off school while she was recovering is Lily Blue Whitehurst. And I'm very pleased to say that she joins me now to share her story. Hello, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm all right. Well, I'm very sorry to hear about what happened to you, of course. Do you want to run us through what did happen?
So I was at one of my friend's house, and the dog was sat across my lap, and it had previously, without me, I didn't know, it had already bitten someone before. And it's a male dog, and it's a English Bull Terrier, so it's quite broad. So I leant forward just because it was heavy and it was on my lap, and it just went up and attacked me on my face.
Oh, gosh. OK, all right. And what happened after that, then? Presumably you had to go to hospital, did you?
Yeah, so obviously, because there was about 6 teenagers, we were all a bit like in shock and we didn't quite know what to do. So I ended up ringing my mum, and she was like, I'll come get you. And then we obviously went to Macclesfield Hospital.
To Macclesfield Hospital. I know Macclesfield rather well, actually. I grew up down the road from there, but there we go, yes. So, OK, how has this changed, or if it has changed at all, your view of dogs, really, and dog owners? Are you afraid of dogs now?
I think I've got dogs myself, so having dogs has really helped me to kind of understand that not all dogs are like that, and also it also has made me aware that you don't also know the history of a dog and how it's been brought up in the house, because my dogs have been brought up amazing and I wouldn't fear them at all, but then there's also, when going into someone's house, there's always in the back of your mind of, well, has this dog also been brought up the same way my dog's has been brought up?
Yeah, exactly. Well, what do you think about the idea, then, that owners should be made to sit some kind of test? I mean, I suppose you could argue people would have to take a test to learn how to drive a car and be able to drive legally, and that could be quite a dangerous thing, driving, of course. So do you think that people should have to undergo something similar if they want to own a dog?
Like a test, but there's definitely should be more restrictions in terms of like getting dogs imported, because this dog was imported as an ex-fighting dog. And how is this dog, after it's been bitten someone, was then allowed back in a home with 6 teenagers with unaware that this is an ex-fighting dog? And there should definitely be more restrictions on, like, if you knew this dog was dangerous, then put it in a different room, put it in a cage, warn people when you're coming in, keep it separate. There's just a lot of things that an owner should do to make sure that people who are going into the homes are safe.
Can I ask you, Lily, do you tend to blame dog owners or the dogs themselves? This is kind of a big debate that people have, isn't it? You know, is it the dog's fault when something bad happens, or is it the way that it was brought up, I suppose you could say? Where do you stand on that?
It's obviously a difficult one, but at the end of the day, whether a dog is dangerous or not, the owner is in charge of that dog. If this dog is dangerous, put it in a separate room. Don't bring it around people. And so you can argue all you want that it's the type of breed that it is, but at the end of the day, the owner has full control of their dog, of who it sees and what it does, and whether it wears a muzzle. Like, I've had staffies since I was younger, and they've been amazing. And we've rescued a staffy, and it's amazing. But we also took the precaution of the fact that we haven't got the full history checks on it, so let's be cautious. But obviously it was perfect and it never did anything. But there's always the fact that you are in charge of that dog. You can move it away from someone else.
Exactly, a bit of responsibility, I think. But look, thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story as well. And it's nice to see that you've bounced back from what must have been a very scary incident for you. And, of course, you've not lost all faith in dogs as well, I can tell, which is lovely stuff. Well, look, thank you so much. Great to have you on the show. That's Lily Blue Whitehurst there, who shared her story. And that was, of course, in relation to the fact that dog attacks apparently are on the rise, and that people should maybe be taking tests in order to keep a dog. I'm not quite sure where I stand on that myself, really, but I do think that maybe owners can do a bit more, which is what Lily was saying there. But anyway, there we go. Well, look, it's nearly that time where I hand you over to the expert hands of Michelle Dewberry, which sounded better in my head than when I said it out loud. But I'm going to dip into the terrifying world of my inbox first, gbnews@gbnews.uk. And lots of you have been getting in touch on whether or not Gary Lineker should be sacked for his comments for comparing the government's asylum policy to 1930s Germany. Al says if Lineker thinks that he's so brilliant, perhaps he should give up £1 million job with the BBC and stand as an MP. I'm sure we'll soon find out what work really is. Cliff says, outside of football, Gary Lineker is unable to think clearly, as demonstrated by his distorted interpretation of the current immigrant situation. I did have another fantastic email in as well that said to me, yes, Gary Lineker might not have got a yellow card during his career, but he famously wasn't particularly good with his head either. So there you go. That, I think, wins email of the day. I'm going to go to Michelle now anyway. Jubes & Co. follows up. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I've just read an email in your inbox. It says, Patrick, I watch your show most days, and not only do you cheer me up with your no-nonsense, full-on opinion, but you make me laugh out loud, which hurts. You're a legend, mate. That says Johnny JB. I thought
it was from my mum.
No, I don't get emails like that.
No, my mum does regularly email in under false names, actually, yes.
Oh, does she?
Yeah.
Right. Well,
it was only a year or so ago. It was only a year or so ago that my mum stopped sending me anonymous Valentine's Day cards, so I didn't feel alone.
You've just brought up a very sore point, because I still cannot get over the fact that on Valentine's Day, ladies and gentlemen, get this, guess who got a Valentine's Day card out of Patrick and I? I can't even get over it.
Yeah.
I am still, to this day, and will continue to be, wounded by the fact that it was you who got the Valentine's Day card.
But it was anonymous. It was anonymous. They did the old traditional little question mark at the time, so I will never know. If you're watching this now, that probably, you know what, actually, on reflection, it probably was my mum.
Aww.
That's just home at home, actually. My mum has managed to post it.
My mum will be watching it. She never writes in.
Oh, well, anyway, right, what you got?
Oh, yes. Anyway, this whole civil service blob thing, how true is that? Should there be an investigation? I mean, come on, get over it. Billionaires, according to Biden, he's going to start taxing them more, which, of course, has popped a lot of people up here saying tax the wealthy more here. I mean, really, how much more do you want to tax people? And Boris Johnson, he's annoying all the right people. He doesn't seem to be doing his job very well at the moment, according to somebody. He's raking it in.
Yeah.
So what should happen to Boris? And get this, I can't end my show without getting into this, everyone.
Go on.
In Scotland, they're proposing, misogyny.
I'm aware, yes.
Yeah, I was waiting for you just to see how much you would acknowledge that you do indeed know misogyny, Patrick. I'm saying nothing. Anyway, if you discuss your sexual conquest out loud in Scotland, if things progress the way that they might be looking to, you could end up locked up in prison for about 7 years or so.
What?
Yes, I'm not even making it up, everyone. True story. You'll get the details on my show in a minute. It's bizarre.
No.
I think this world has gone mad.
Well, that's like every lying 14-year-old boy who's just got, well, you won't know if she's at a different school. So they can't even make it up now, can they? Because they'll end up getting locked up.
I know, it's all weird, isn't it? Sometimes I don't envy you guys. I think life, when there's a pecking order at the moment, white men, you're right at the bottom.
But it would be a good thing, actually, because I suppose if anything like me, growing up, weren't necessarily as active as they would have liked to have been. Now I could have, instead of having to reveal or make things up, I could have just gone, I'm not legally allowed to talk about it.
I would tell. I mean, there's so many, I don't have time to tell you, but I can't tell you even if I wanted to, because I might end up in prison.
Yeah, I'm not going to, I would tell you all about it, and it's non-stop. I'm telling you that, it's non-stop, but I can't. I don't want to do
There's an image
time
I
in
don't
prison.
want in my head. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. All right, well, Michelle is coming your way very, very shortly. Michelle Dewberry with Jubes & Co. Look, thank you very much, everybody who's been getting in touch throughout the course of this show. I will be back again this evening as well from 9 until 11 p.m. for another stellar, sparkling edition of Dan Wotton Tonight, but this time with me, Patrick Christys. Look, Michelle comes your way very, very shortly with Jubes & Co. Take it easy, people.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.